call to order the Village of Riverside, Illinois Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting and public hearing for Wednesday, October 24th, 2018. Director Epp, will you call the roll?
Yes, Chairperson Mateo.
I am here.
Commissioner Scanlon. Here. Commissioner Hannon.
Here.
Commissioner Marhol.
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Pelletier. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have a motion and a second to approve the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting minutes and public hearing minutes of September 26, 2018?
I will move to approve the minutes.
Second.
I note one edit on page 6. Third complete paragraph. Third line down about the efficiency range.
Oops.
That's all I have. Anybody else? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
The ayes have it. Thank you.
Any visitor comments? President Sells?
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. You can probably hear the ghosts and goblins in the background as they're filtering out. I was here for the Halloween event that the juniors put on, and since I was here, I wanted to take a minute to come down and just tell you something you probably don't hear nearly enough, which is how much the work you do is appreciated by the people in this village. The last several months, you've had a number of very difficult items before you, some of which were very contentious, some of which were almost mind-numbingly full of minutia, and you have handled it all with grace and skill and dedication. So on behalf of the village board, I just want to come and say thank you for the work that you do on behalf of our village. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks. Our trustee liaison is not here. Do you have any update from the village board?
I don't think we have anything new. The small cell ordinance was approved at the last board meeting, so that's been adopted. December 6th is the next follow-up on the village board for the garages and driveways. So we're working on some additional information for the board members to consider at that meeting. So we'll see what we have. We have our engineer looking at the driveway width and turning radiuses, and we have an architect looking similarly at attached garage widths and the widths of the doors and things like that. So hopefully we'll have some additional information for them to take into consideration as they reopen that item and discuss that text amendment more. So I don't know if there'll be final action at that meeting, but they'll at least be discussing it some more.
Okay.
Okay? Anything else, Michael, that I'm not thinking of?
I just wanted to follow up on the small cell. One of the points that Commissioner Hannon brought up at this meeting was about the concern about them being on the house side of the sidewalk, the new poles and stuff.
Yes.
And you know, I said I would think about that, and following up on that suggestion, thinking about it more, talking about at Historic Preservation Commission, they had reviewed the draft ordinance too and expressed concerns. So what we're going to do is add language in the ordinance, not in the zoning code, but in the small cell ordinance, giving a HPC some powers over these based on our historic district status, which makes us kind of unique among villages. The fact that almost the whole village is a historic district. But giving HPC some powers of review, and I think that we can affirmatively prevent them from being on the house side of the sidewalk. And so we're going to add those things in the code, and I want to just thank you for bringing that up and let you know that we're working on it.
Okay, moving on. Can I get a motion and a second to reopen public hearing PZ 18-04, which was continued from our September 26th meeting?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, for the record, I note that all the commissioners are still here. Also note that the public notice was read into the record on the at that September meeting. Briefly, we're considering a request for a proposed text amendment to the Village of Riverside zoning ordinance to allow daycares as special uses in the B1C Commercial Zoning District, amending Section 1059, Table 4, for the use in bulk requirement tables for the B1 and B2 zoning districts to daycares, adult as special uses, adult or child, I think, special uses in the B1C Commercial Zoning District, and to make other such conforming changes to the sections as needed, as well as a concurrent request for a special use permit to allow a child daycare center in the B1C Commercial Zoning District for the property located at 2722, 2726 South Harlem. The petitioner is Ms. Maricel Castellano of Happy Times Child Development. If you would stand up to be sworn in and raise your right hand, please.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right,
Director Abt, if you can give us a summary.
Yes, I can give you some background. Currently, our zoning ordinance only allows daycare centers in our B2 commercial zoning district where they're classified as a special use. The petitioner is proposing to open up a daycare at 2722 to 2726 South Harlem, which is located in our B1C zoning district. Daycares are not listed in that use table, therefore they are considered prohibited. So she is requesting a text amendment to add a daycare center as a special use in the B1C district, and concurrently her special use application so that she can operate a daycare. 2722 to 2726 are the middle units in that shopping center where there's To Your Taste on the one end and then Shining Smiles on the other side. Daycares are already defined in our zoning ordinance. They already have use standards in there, so this text amendment is pretty simple in just adding that to the use table and designating it as a special use, and then it would reference those standards just as the B2 reference does. So in our zoning ordinance, a child daycare center is defined as any child care facility, whether established for gain or otherwise, which generally provides care for less than 24 hours per day for more than 3 children in a facility other than a residential dwelling. Child daycare center does not include programs operated by a public or private elementary or secondary school. And then there's also a definition for adult daycare centers in there. And then we have our use standards that are in 10.6.2, which the table will reference. And here it says that you'll have no daycare facility shall operate unless the operator possesses a valid daycare facility license or permit issued by the state of Illinois, as well as a state fire marshal approval permit if applicable. Every daycare facility is subject to all applicable Village of Riverside codes, and the valid license or permit shall be prominently displayed within the facility at all times, and copies of the license or permit shall be provided to the village prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. Each operator shall make available to the village fire department upon request the number of children or adults being cared for in the facility at any one time. The fire department shall have the authority to reduce the permitted number of children or adults based on the Village of Riverside's fire code as in effect at this time. All child care facilities shall provide adequate outdoor play areas in accordance with the state of Illinois licensing requirements. So as I said, where she's proposing to locate is in the B1C commercial district. The properties to the north and south are also zoned commercial B1C. The properties to the west are in our R1A residential zoning district, and the properties to the east across Harlem Avenue are located in Berwyn. And they are the Berwyn Public Library and the public storage building that's also there at the corner. So the petitioner is looking to locate her daycare in this shopping center. She states that it will be open Monday through Friday from 6:30 a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. and will be serving children ages 0 to 12 years. She estimates that they could accommodate up to 50 children in the unit, but that final determination for that maximum number will be made by the state, by DCFS, once their zoning approvals are secured. The shopping center where the daycare is located does have 16 parking spaces on site and has access from both Harlem Avenue and Long Common. The petitioner will not be providing an on-site outdoor play area, and I'm sure she can go into the details of that more, but she states that she has obtained verbal state approval to be able to utilize a nearby park. So one of the requirements that we have for a condition would be that she has to provide proof that the state has approved the use of the off-site outdoor play area. Additionally, since this includes a text amendment, this did have to go before the Preservation Commission for review. So the Preservation Commission reviewed the text amendment at their October 11th meeting. The preservation ordinance states that all proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance should be submitted to the Preservation Commission for review and comment as to the effect of such proposal on the historic landmark designation of the village or on the general plan of Riverside. And these comments are to be submitted to the village board. So their comments will be submitted to the village board along with your findings of fact. But they did state that they found that the proposed amendment to allow daycares in the B1C zoning district would have no detrimental effect on our landmark designation. So you have the findings of fact standards for both text amendments as well as special use in your staff report. Should you recommend approval of the text amendment and the special use, staff does recommend conditions, the following conditions be applied. These are kind of just reiterations of what the standards for the special use are, but it's good to just make sure that they are called out. So that a building permit or occupancy permit must be obtained by the petitioner. A sign permit must be obtained by the petitioner for any exterior signage. A copy of the state daycare facility license must be provided to the village. A copy of the state fire marshal approval must be provided to the village. And proof of the state approval of the off-site outdoor play area must be provided to the village. And if there's any other conditions as you discuss things that you want to add in there, you certainly can add them to it. Ms. Castellanos here, and she can kind of go through more of the details about the daycare that she wants to operate and can answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Castellano, would you like to go to the podium and tell us more about your proposed business?
Well, I've been operating a daycare center, a daycare home for about 8 years, and my daycare is a Spanish immersion, and I've been in charge of teaching. I have an associate's degree in early childhood. As of right now, I have 20 children already, and I do have a waiting list, believe it or not. And I think it's going to be, it's a necessity for the kids as of right now. A daycare center is always, it's always good to have one. It's always, I don't know, do you have any questions? And one more thing, I'm sorry for making you come in last time. Something came up and I wasn't able to come here, so I'm sorry to make you come last time.
We were here anyway, that's fine. Commissioners, do you have questions?
Yes, Marisol, can you tell me what park or what outdoor space you're planning to use and how often you envision the kids would be out in the community as opposed to in the facility itself?
As long as it's weather permitted, we will walk to the park.
Which park, though? I guess I was
Proska Park.
I'm sorry, what?
Proska
Oh,
Park.
Proska Park.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, very good. And could I keep going? Is that okay? All right, okay. I noted that you would have up to 9 employees when you're at your maximum number of children. How many would you have per shift? Like, what's the maximum number of employees that would be working at any one time?
Well, as I will begin with about 6 employees, and then we'll go up from there. Depends on DCFS, how many children they give, but I'm looking at about 50 children, so it will definitely be more than 9 employees.
Okay.
Yes, it will be, I would say about 6 full-time and about 4 part-time.
But I noticed you have shifts, so what would be the maximum number of employees? I guess I'm just trying to figure out how many parking spots you would need.
My employees will not use the parking spot. They will use a street parking.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Which street were you envisioning that they would park on?
Well, some of them live close by, so some, like me, I will be walking.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of assistants right now, and there is a side street. I think it's Long Common Road. Mm-hmm. So
But why wouldn't you plan on the employees actually parking in the parking lot as opposed to parking on a residential street?
Well, they can use either one. I would just give them options, so they would use either one. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And keep going. No, next question. In terms of the drop-off and pickup, because you already operate a daycare, do you have any data on, about what percentage of kids come?
Like the peak hours?
Yeah.
Yes, they're usually like from 6:30 in the morning to the latest 8:30, 9. Yeah.
Is your peak? Okay.
Yes. And I did find out that the dentist and the restaurant, they do open at 10 and 11. So it will be different. My peak hours will be different from their opening hours.
But what about pickup? What are your
Pickup, it's usually from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Anywhere from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So they have like a long, 3 hours to pick up.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
I assume that you've got full support of the building owner,
Yes.
because he also owns the dental facility.
Yes, I
So-
did talk to him at the beginning. We've been working on this for months already because of DCFS, how long they take, and just to answer one simple question. So yes, he knows since the beginning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ma'am, what was it about this particular property that made it attractive to you?
So right now I have a daycare, so it's close by. It's like almost like a block away. That's one thing, because I can always transfer my children that I already have to the other one, and it's a good street.
Is there, to your knowledge, was there anything, a similar property that was available that would not require a zoning change? Anything else in Riverside?
No, I did look. I wasn't able to find anything, and I've been looking.
Okay.
Well, but this isn't a zoning change, it's a text.
I'm sorry, a text amendment. Is there anything in the permitted zoning districts?
No, I did look. Yeah.
Have some questions, given the fact that it's a sort of L-shaped building. Have you put together any sort of plans on pickup and drop-off with traffic flow in light of the fact of how busy Harlem is?
Well, like I said, there will be no more, the parking spots will be there available at the peak hours. They can always come in through I will come up with a plan where to enter and where to exit, so I can tell the parents. Because there is where they can enter and where they can exit, so yes, there is.
Do you, I mean...
I'm sorry, did I answer your question, or?
I guess my concern on sort of what we're being asked to do is the impact on the neighbors. And you've already talked about using on-street parking for the staff, and just where you have another daycare located nearby, as I understand it. I mean, do people usually park and drop off, or do they get out of their cars? I'm just trying to understand the traffic flow.
Oh, okay.
And the stress
Drop off
that-
and pick up is usually from 5 to 10 minutes. And if you're trying to, there probably won't be too much traffic, even though it's going to be 50 children, because it doesn't mean that it's going to be 50 cars. For example, as of right now, I have 20 children, and I only have 8 families. So that means only 8 cars are going in. Why? Because they have more than one kid.
Do you know how close to Harlem people can park on Long Common? Like, how far into Riverside parking starts?
I think it's the whole block. I haven't checked after the block, but I think it's in the whole block. There's also parking on the side of Berwyn, right in back of the library.
And I'm not sure where Prosca Park is. How many blocks would the kids be walking?
It's about, I would say 2.5 blocks.
So they would have to cross Harlem,
Yes.
which in your application you said has strong vehicle traffic. I think we would all tend to agree with that. Has DCFS already approved that location and having to cross a major
Yes,
street?
they have done it with other daycare, so that's why they approved this one too.
They have approved it.
Yes.
Okay. Have you seen this?
I've not gotten any letter yet, no.
Yeah, they haven't, I did ask for a letter, but they said not until I get the approval from the zoning. Then they will be able to give me a letter. They don't want to do anything until I get the approval from Sony.
Okay. And what's going to be inside? So how are the kids when they're inside going to be spending their time?
Oh, okay. Well, there's going to be, I will be the director because I am approved to be a director. I'm looking to have about 4 classes. I will do 0 to 12 years old. It will be from 6:30 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. We will teach the kids all the things that they need to get ready for kindergarten. We will also teach Spanish. It will be a Spanish immersion as well, so we will be teaching 2 languages at the same time. They're welcome to speak, the kids are welcome to speak any language they feel comfortable with, but the teachers will speak some Spanish too.
But what's going to be inside? Don't you have to provide meals and places for children to nap?
Yes. Meals will be provided, lunch, AM snack, breakfast, and PM snack, and a 2-hour nap for the children, 5 years and younger.
Okay, so can you just describe the layout as you anticipate developing it?
Oh, okay. Well, I still haven't set up the rooms, but there will be 4 rooms. I don't know which one is going to be first, depending on DCFS, what they said, what room could be the first one, what room could be the second one. But there will be, for example, the first room could be the 2-year-old to 5-year-old, 2-year-old to 5-year-old. They will have, I don't know how to describe it, like a regular class. A lot of toys, a lot of things, toys to keep the kids busy and always learning.
Okay. Other questions?
Where is your existing location?
It's located in Berwyn. It's a home daycare.
So it's in a house? It's
Yes,
in a house.
yes, you can
Okay.
Google it on Facebook. If you have Facebook, Happy Times Home Daycare.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you have 20 children currently
Yes.
in that home?
Yes, I mean at different times, not all at the same
Right.
time.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
There is no one else in the audience, so we don't have any objectors or interested parties. Any additional questions for Director Abt? Have we received any further comments or any comments since we received the packet? Okay.
I have a question for Director Abt. So what are the financial implications to the village of allowing daycares in the business center? So in terms of taxes and other, like if we kept it as retail versus moving to daycare, do you have any kind of estimate of what the impact to the village would be?
We haven't really broken down that. I mean, if somebody were to put in, like the dentist's office, if somebody were to put in another medical office in there, it would be a similar situation where we would not be getting any sales tax off of that use. So the district does allow for the mix of both retail and personal service and office uses. So in that regard, it's kind of the luck of the draw. So Unfortunately, that is a business district that we've established over in that area where she's looking to locate. So on that block, starting with the gas station that's on the south side of the intersection, going north to the former Title Max property that is a business district. It's a taxing district thing, separate from business zoning district. And in that case, you know, we established that so that we could be able to regain some of our expense in tearing down and remediating the dry cleaners site that was located in there. And so we've established an additional sales tax, so any business in there charges an additional 1% sales tax, and that goes into the business district fund, and that can be used to, should we choose to, make us whole for the expenses that we went through for the remediation of the one site there. And for any future development plans, it can be used for any redevelopment that might happen in there to try to incentivize that. So,
So since the sales tax is only on tangible property, not on services, this would not generate any sales tax
Exactly.
revenue for the village?
exactly.
Okay.
But to your point, a different type of medical, you know, not daycare, but a different like a medical office could go in and we would be in the same
And we-
spot,
yeah,
because
and that's
what's
already
allowed.
permitted, and-
Right.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Director Epp, do you know when the daycare centers were put into the code as a special use?
I'm thinking it happened back in the 2000, let me see if they've got a note out here. I want to say it probably happened right around 2004, 2005 with that update, but let me double check and see what it says.
Oh, and I'm sorry. In regards,
Can you go to the podium, please?
in regards to your question, I was kind of nervous, so, for the class, we do have centers. I mean, to have a better description of the classes, each class has their own various centers, like for the science center, the social studies, the reading center, so I could give you a better description. So we do have centers on every class.
Okay, thank you.
So it references in there 2005, which is when we had the major rewrite, but I feel like these were probably already in the code prior to that, because the B2 updates happened earlier than that, and so I think they were probably already a special use in the B2 district. When the B1 district was done, that was in 2009, and I don't know why they weren't caught at that time.
And do you know what the policy was, or the reasoning why they were only permitted as special uses in the B2?
Daycares historically are considered special uses in most towns. So they are typically designated as special uses regardless of what,
But why was it put into the B2 only, do you know?
that part I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's almost every town around here.
A special use, yeah.
Yes.
So, but why just the B2, I
And
can't
it's
explain.
for most towns.
I'm more curious as to why only in the B2.
It is allowed as a use in all residential zones in Riverside, is it?
Home daycares are, yes.
Home daycares, right.
But that
And
does
those
have,
are
that
permitted
does have a
uses.
limit on the number of children per the
And those
state
are permitted
regulations.
uses, right?
Yes.
And it's for adult daycare as well in residential districts.
What's the limit for home daycares for the number of kids?
I believe it depends, it's gonna be.
It depends if you have a group daycare or a regular, or without a group, just a home daycare. It could be anything from 12 to 26.
So, but a lot of home daycares, it's 8 or less
8 to 18.
versus the group home daycare.
But they usually start at 6, 7.
And that tends to, that follows the DCF, because DCFS designates a home daycare versus a group home daycare versus a daycare center. Those are all 3 different licenses with the state. So, and each one has its limit on the number of children, et cetera, that you can have. So a daycare center is always something that's in a commercial center i.e. not in a residential district. And then you have the group home or the daycare, home daycare, that are the other two licenses that are ones that are in homes. So,
And how is the group home described? or
group home
defined?
typically allows more children and you'll have additional employees. So a group home, I think, starts at 8 children.
That's 12 children.
12 children, so, and I don't think that our zoning ordinance allows for the group home. Daycare. Definitions.
I think there is allowance, not for daycares, but for some kind of like group residential homes. I forget what they're called, because I didn't bring the code with me.
Here's my table. There they are. So we have assisted living facilities, those are only permitted in the R3 and R4. But daycare, home, child, or adult, large, so more than 8 children or adults, is a special use in any of our residential districts. A daycare home, 8 or fewer children, is a permitted use in any of our residential districts. So for us, 8 is our cutoff. For that, so.
Other questions for Director Abt? Would someone like to make a motion? Oh, would you like to make a closing statement? You don't need to, if you have anything to add.
Well, I'm just really excited about this opportunity that I hope I will get, and I will make the best of it.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to make a motion to either close or continue the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing?
Second.
No, okay.
No?
You can second, I was going to say.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So since we have both the text amendment and the special use, those are two different votes we'll have. Let's start with a discussion before we have formal motion on those. Any general thoughts?
I'm curious as to whether there is a policy that would foreclose this type of special use in the B1C. Would it somehow be detrimental to the village to have it as a special use?
As versus permitted, or just
Just
to
at all?
have a daycare
Yeah.
in the B1C?
To have a daycare in the B1C? I don't necessarily see one, but that's why I was asking before, what was the reasoning behind not having it there as a special use when it was adopted initially? Maybe there was no reason, just wasn't thought of, I don't know.
Attorney Mars, are you familiar with any prohibitions of daycares in commercial areas?
No, no, I'm not. I understand his question to be getting more at the legislative history of why these weren't included, and I don't have any insight on that.
Okay.
Sonia, nothing?
I had in the past asked Attorney Mars, if this text amendment is made, the only the only zoning district in our village that could not allow a child daycare center is the B1TC. So I had asked him at some point in the past, well, why aren't we also considering B1TC? So now I'm thinking perhaps that was the reason why it was only in the B2, because perhaps someone came to the village, requested that text amendment to allow a daycare center in only a B2, and had not requested it for another B1. And as Attorney Mars had explained to me, it's the petitioner's petition, so they don't care about the other zoning district. So maybe that's why it was allowed at some point in the B2 and not elsewhere.
Right, and that's a common occurrence. That's how sometimes these things end up random seeming.
Right, so it could be a random reason and not because there was some dislike of daycare centers in the B1C.
So to your question, if we look at standards for the text amendment of C and D, that kind of gets at that, especially with this property being within the special tax district. Along with G. I might be over-interpreting that.
So are we gonna do the standards, or what are you thinking, or?
I wanted to have a more general discussion first, but we can jump to the standards if we
Well-
are ready.
Sounds good.
Yeah, one, I don't know if this is the appropriate time or in the context of the other discussion, but, you know, in the email that was sent along, you know, the concern I continue to have about this site is the high traffic on Harlem, and then the anticipation that there could be up to 30 cars coming in at pickup and drop off. And, you know, in the discussion today, there was really no plan for traffic flow and park cars on Long Common during a majority of the business hours. And, you know, the concern I have is you know, is that creating a traffic safety situation as cars come in and out for pickup and drop off, and would have to turn back around to head back out onto Harlem off of Long Common, which is not the natural flow of traffic. So I'm just, without a traffic plan or traffic study, I'm not quite sure how to go about solving that issue.
Yeah, definitely when we talk about the special use portion of it, that's my primary concern, is the parking. I'm not in favor of the employees parking for long stretches on a residential street. And further to your prior question, Chairman Mateo, the parking on Long Common starts at the first house. So prior to that, it's the egress from the parking that's along Long Common associated with this property in question. So the street parking would start at the very first residential house. And as some of you may have seen on Facebook, there's quite a few residents who live near the commuter stations for Metro who are concerned about people parking all day long in front of their house and then going to the train and impacting their ability to have friends or family over to visit and having to park quite a distance from their home. And in some cases, their egress and entry into their own driveway is impacted by cars parking for long stretches. So further to your point about the parking and the entry and exit from that parking lot are my main concerns when we get to the special use piece. Or maybe we're talking about it all together, I don't know.
Are we, or should we talk about it all together, or should we consider the special use first? And, I'm sorry, not the special use, but the text amendment first and then the special use. Are they, by definition, bound together? No. No.
I just wanted us to discuss what our general concerns are, if any, so we can tease those out and then hone in on those when it comes time to discuss the standards.
I think if we are really concerned about traffic flow, we could make that part of our recommendation as part of the special use. That maybe right in, right out. Yes, right in, right out. has to be a requirement for the driveway along Harlem, for instance. I don't know if it is right now. And if you want to go otherwise, then you have to get onto Long Common and use the left turn lane. That would certainly improve the safety issue. With regards to the people parking in front, I think that's an issue that the residents need to take up with the village with regards to parking regulations. I'm not sure that this use is going to generate aside from the employees, I don't think the drop-offs and pickups are going to be a significant parking issue.
Right, yeah, I was envisioning for the employees parking there all day, not the people in drop-off and pick-up, right?
I'm sorry, can I say something? There will be 2 shifts, so they will not be like all day long. Employees, and they will also park in the Berwyn area, like it's by the library.
Okay.
And I guess I go back to I'm not concerned about the on-street parking. My concern is if there's 30 cars coming in, I mean, for those of you who drop off at Central or St. Mary's, you see what 20 cars can do to the ability to move in and out. In light of the fact that that's a high-traffic street intersection already, 30 cars coming in the Harlem entrance and going out the alley entrance, skipping back onto Long Common, is that going to cause a disruption of the existing traffic flow? I mean, we're not talking 5 cars, we're talking, up to 30 over, even if it's 10 every half hour, that's still a significant jamming of the traffic.
It totally depends on how much the cars are spread out.
Which we don't know.
We've got some knowledge, some local knowledge that it's gonna spread out between 6:30 and 9. So that's, 2.5 hours. Central has 400 kids, and they all come and go at the same time, so that traffic is significantly more.
Right, but I go back to even St. Mary's on the front side of the school, which very few kids get dropped off. That still becomes a little bit of a traffic slowdown, and that's people going one direction. Here, they're coming in Harlem, and in effect viewing it up to get back out on Harlem, and having to cut across traffic on Long Common to be headed back east. And that's my concern is, for people that have driven Long Common between 6 and 8, that's a busy street. There's a lot of cars waiting for the light, and does that cause sort of a traffic backup that we're not anticipating? I mean, even if it's, like I said, even if it's 10 cars coming through in a half hour, that's still enough to disrupt the natural flow. Or it could be. I don't know. I don't think any of us know.
I think that there is a massive volume of traffic on Harlem, and I'm guessing that 30 cars is not going to really impact it a great deal. I totally understand your point, and I understand the point as far as the neighbors and all the rest, but I think this is going to be a fairly small chunk of time every day when parents are going to park, they're going to walk their kids in, they're going to come back out, they're going to leave. And that's going to be it. And it looks to me like there's sufficient parking spaces to handle that. And it's not like a fast food restaurant, where you're going to have a lot of in and out traffic constantly. So to me, parking and the traffic flow is something it's just going to evolve as it does, and it shouldn't be a cause to look unfavorably on this petition for myself.
Yeah, I guess to clarify, my concern was on Long Common, not Harlem.
I think Commissioner Marple's point about perhaps barring, left-hand turns out of the property onto Harlem is could be very appropriate.
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen. I'd be a brave soul who tries that one. I think the concern is the left-hand turn coming out of the Long Common ramp and getting, trying to head east as opposed to heading west, turning around and coming back out. That's where you're going to see your congestion.
Right, that's because if you come in on Harlem, the way the property is configured, your natural exit is on the west side of the parking lot, and that feeds you right into the alley. And then the only way to go is to cut across westbound traffic, go into eastbound traffic, and then go back out. So that's just an unnatural flow of traffic in the morning. And again, I don't think any of us know, we're all guessing on what the volume is. I'm just trying to understand, is that, that could be a problem that gets created by this special use, just given the way that the parking lot is set up.
I do feel like there's going to be a concentration of pickup and drop-offs. It's going to be at the peak hour of traffic for the area, for Harlem and Long Common. And the way that the site is set up, I mean, there's parking on this south side of the building that really limits the ability for cars to even get out onto Long Common. They really have to, I mean, they're within the curb radius, almost driving over the handicap ramp to get onto Long Common. So I just feel like this location is maybe not the best.
And I think the analogy is, if you look at the Dunkin' Donuts at Ogden down the street from Stella's, I mean, it only takes 6 cars before that's spilled out onto Joliet. And, that would be a concern if that's the same situation here. Does it spill out onto Harlem? Does it spill out onto Long Common? Where, this lack of sort of traffic planning is giving me pause.
Can I say something?
Sure, please go to the podium, though.
Yes, this will not be the first time that a daycare is set up in a busy street. Like I said, if I'm hoping that I will get approved for 50 children, to my guess, it will probably be about 30 cars or less. They will never meet up all 30 cars at the same time. They could be anywhere from 6:30 in the morning to 9:30 in the morning, or even later than that. Each parent works different hours. Thank you.
And I guess my point is, maybe this is solvable. I mean, just nothing's been presented on how, and again, I go back to the configuration of the parking lot as raising the issue, not necessarily that it's on a busy street, but it's just a awkward parking lot with ingress and egress.
I find it difficult to get in and out of that parking lot when there's almost no traffic and nobody using the lot. That's what I'm basing my concerns on.
We should probably hit the text amendment part of it then first, I would think.
Yeah. Should we have a motion before we go through the standards?
Sure.
I have a question. Can we also consider a text amendment for the TC?
Transitional?
Yeah, the
B1
transitional,
TC.
exactly.
We can't because it's not
Cannot, okay.
published for that.
Okay.
So we're limited to this.
Okay.
You can always say, hey, we think
We
it's a
should
good idea
consider
to do that too, and we
Right.
can come back, but we can't do it tonight.
Okay.
And just a reminder on the standards, remember, amendments are a little different than special uses and variations, whereas you're looking at all these standards, but not everyone has to be met the same way they are. They're just more for guidance and formulating your decision.
Thank you for that. Would anybody like to make a motion concerning the text amendment?
I would move that we approve the text amendment as proposed.
Is there a second?
A second.
All right. Let's go discuss the standards. So the first one is the extent to which the proposed amendment promotes the public health, safety, comfort, convenience, and general welfare of the village.
Yeah, provides a service that people in town need.
Childcare, okay. the relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant.
I think that's supported by Commissioner Scanlon's commentary. It's a benefit to the community.
The consistency of the proposed amendment with village plans.
Appears to be consistent since it's a special use in other areas.
And generally trying to encourage small business formation.
Then again, the village's plans for that area was to reap sales taxes, because it's in that special district.
Understood, but we have the dentist office there, which provides 0, I would imagine, sales taxes, so I think we've kind of already gone down that road to some degree.
And also, I think, sort of counter to that statement that, you know, we're creating a traffic flow area that may be attractive to other ancillary businesses in the undeveloped lot, or, you know, additional food and takeout services. So I think it's increases the traffic flow, which may be positive to getting to that ultimate goal of retail sales.
I think that's a very good observation. The more activity you have, the more people coming in and out and visiting the outskirts of Riverside, the more likely it is, yes, that there would be some other kind of a food establishment or something like that that will take advantage of some of those other properties.
Yeah, I have mixed emotions on it. I really wish we could get more business that was bringing in sales tax. But I get to your point, Director App, that it's the luck of the draw, and we could get a medical or other service business in there. So, but adding in daycare adds one more option for it not to be generating sales tax. So should we be contributing to that? In terms of bringing in traffic, definitely more people coming in would observe and potentially go to other businesses, but I would think that people picking up and dropping off their kids aren't hanging around. They're on their way to work, or they're on their way home with their kids and doing whatever, you know, dinner, homework, whatever, after work. I don't necessarily know that that type of traffic would drive significant volume, but that is based on absolutely no data. So I don't know if it's true or not.
Sounds perfect for a pizza place right next to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
good
for
point.
dinner.
Right. There definitely are businesses, you're right, that would benefit, especially in the pickup, you know, picking up other things at the same time. You're absolutely right.
And there is the gas station
That's right.
adjacent, so.
That's right.
Micro pizzas, really good.
I didn't mean that they should combine.
There's
Okay.
an opportunity there.
The consistency of the proposed amendment with the intent and general regulations of this zoning ordinance.
Seems to be consistent.
Again, without sales tax, but I think that's similar to C.
Right.
E, whether the proposed amendment corrects an error or omission, which adds clarification to existing requirements or reflects a change in policy.
Well, that may be the case, but we don't know if it was a correction, an error of an oversight.
Without knowing why the B2 district was granted the special use versus B1C, I don't know.
F, that the proposed amendment will benefit the residents of the village as a whole, not just the applicant, property owners, neighbors of any property under consideration, or other special interest groups, and the extent to which the proposed use would be in the public interest and would not serve solely the interest of the applicant.
I
Think we're in agreement there?
Yes.
G, whether the proposed amendment provides a more workable way to achieve the intent and purposes of the zoning ordinance and the village plans. Do we have anything to add to that?
No comment on
I
that.
don't
Yeah,
think so.
I don't see how it applies. H, the extent to which the proposed amendment creates nonconformities,
I don't believe
not
so.
applicable. I, the extent to which the proposed amendment is consistent with the overall structure and organization of the zoning ordinance.
I think that's true, yes, it's fitting right into the tables and the structure.
Okay. So do we want to vote on this one, or do we want to discuss the special use standards?
I think we should move forward with a vote on this.
I agree.
Okay. Sonia, Director App, will you call the roll, please?
All right, Commissioner Scanlon,
Yes.
Commissioner Hannan,
Yes?
Commissioner Marhol,
Yes.
Commissioner Mendoza,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Pelletier,
Yes.
Chairperson Mateo.
Yes.
Okay, text amendment passes.
Would somebody like to make a motion concerning the special use request?
I will make a motion that we approve the special use as requested by the petitioner.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Now, for the special use, we have to consider, sorry, I've already forgotten all of these, or just
Yes.
consider them? Okay. So A, the proposed use is designated by the zoning ordinance as a special use in the district in which the use is to be located.
Yes?
Well,
Yes.
we just made that happen.
That's the easy one.
Proposed use will comply with all applicable regulations in the district in which the use is to be located. As you made so,
Yes.
Yes, with the conditions.
as, yep.
With additional conditions, yes.
C, the location and size of the proposed use, the nature and intensity of the operation involved in or conducted in connection with it, the size of the site in relation to it, and the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it are such that it will be in harmony with the appropriate and the orderly development of the district in which it is located. Discussed.
I think that can be true with perhaps some conditions on parking and ingress and egress. And I'm wondering, is it appropriate in this situation to, would the Director Apt, would the police department ever do like an analysis or a review of the parking area and the ingress and egress and make any recommendations or suggestions to the property owner for how to mark, no right turn, no left turn, those kinds of things?
We could ask them to do that. I think perhaps our traffic engineer or something would be better,
Okay, then the traffic engineer,
better
fine.
source to look at that. I mean, obviously, the police department would know more of the crash data information and could provide
Right.
that to the traffic engineer. So,
So perhaps that could be one condition, is to have a review by the village's traffic engineer, review and approval by the village's traffic engineer of the traffic flow into and out of the parking lot.
Can I ask a general question?
Of course.
Sonia and Commissioner, or Chairman Mateo, excuse me. Has the village got any firm ideas on what potential uses were being suggested for the former dry cleaner area and the former Title Max property? Or
We'll
was
just
this
field that
all
one.
very loose?
it's pretty loose. We don't have anything at this time. We have hired a realtor to market the dry cleaner's property, the former dry cleaner property for us. So given the size of the lot, he said it's gonna be fairly limited to what you could put there. He's thinking it would be probably more of an office use if that property was developed alone. He doesn't necessarily know that you'd be getting a retail use in there. And if you did, it would be a very kind of specialized sort of niche thing. There's more opportunity with the corner lot, with the Title Max property, to try and get something else in, perhaps with a drive-through. There's just a little bit more land there and more opportunity with it being not an interior space, but a corner unit as well that has more attractive redevelopment possibilities. At this point, though, I believe Title Max still technically has a lease on the property, so the owner of it is not actively marketing at this point because he's still getting rent.
Making money.
Yeah.
My unsaid theoretical question was, were uses anticipated that would also generate high levels of traffic? And since the potential uses are unknown, I don't think we can say anything in regards to other possibilities further to the north.
Of course, the hope is there, but until it materializes, we don't know.
Exactly. It's unknown.
But I think we always have to assume that it's possible, that there would be a high use, there could be a high use on that property.
But if it's
I
gonna
mean,
be.
in other words, to approve something, crossing our fingers that the adjacent property wouldn't develop with a high use.
I'm actually, if there was another high use, I think it actually supports a high use here too. I look at North Riverside and all the driveways that go out into Harlem.
So the other opportunity with redevelopment on the adjacent properties is that there's the potential to create cross-access easements so that people could go onto the adjacent properties to the north to be able to exit out that way to get onto either Harlem Avenue, if that's easier than trying to have that such a narrow way to turn left to then go onto Harlem Avenue if you wanted to go north, or even south if it's just not workable depending on where you parked to get back out onto Harlem with kind of the awkward situation on there. So I think from my standpoint is hopefully with any sort of redevelopment that happens to the north, we could get some sort of cross-access accommodated across those properties to help with traffic better. So
Is there any way we could require that?
when they go through the development review process, we can make that request. So
And it would require cross-access on this property as
Yes.
well? So that would require this owner to agree to cross-access?
it would require them to work together to get that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that is a requirement we could place on this special use that,
On this special use,
yes?
with no,
Well, the petitioner is not the
this-
building owner.
No, the petitioner is not the building owner, but the building owner is working with the petitioner and is trying to get this approved as well. So it seems that the building owner, property owner, would be working with them and would be able to make that commitment. I would feel more
and there's nothing to
comfortable-
connect to though at this point.
No, but it's a commitment in the future to agree to cross-access, or to work with the village at the very least to provide cross-access.
Yeah, I think if it was phrased as work with the village rather than a strict requirement, because we really don't know what type of use and how it would all fit together. And also, there's just nothing there yet, and it could be 2 months or it could be 2 years, you just don't know. But I think, given concerns over traffic, that a requirement that the property owner work in the future with whatever is developed to the north to create cross-access is okay. And then we would have to talk to the property owner. She would have to reach out to him between now and the board meeting to find out the acceptability on his part of that.
So back to C, do we think that standard has been met?
I think with appropriate precautions and the addition of right in, right out, I think yes.
So you're proposing right in, right out on Harlem?
Yes. I don't, based on what you just said and looking at that site map, I don't think a whole lot of people are actually gonna go off on that Long Common. It's too tight, and the minute you have one car parked along the spaces that back up onto Long Common, no one's gonna go that way. At least it's highly unlikely.
You know, people don't often obey signs.
I'm aware of that.
Let me pose this question. If there was going to be a permitted use go into this space, retail. Say a coffee chain with a certain green and white logo that we knew was gonna drive a lot of traffic through here. Would there be any opportunity for the village to start imposing in and out, right in, right out restrictions on the traffic flow?
It would depend. If they were getting a drive-through, right, it would be.
Right,
a
drive-throughs
special
are
use.
Just
special
assuming no drive-through, but if we're just gonna have a
Okay.
high-volume retail, that's a permitted use there.
So fitting,
Would
sorry
they have
to
to-
interrupt, fitting within all the rules.
Right.
Just
Would we
wanna
have
Would
any
they have to
shot?
come for site plan approval at all?
If they were just going in and doing a build-out, no.
No. So no.
Okay.
But would they, given the situation that they're in, because the site is tight?
Depends how much money they think they could make.
Right. And then we would have no input into the traffic issues posed by it, and presumably would be headed for the sales tax.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you think of that one chain that's over on that little stub of Plainfield and Ogden, people could turn left out of that, and it's similar to the situation with Long Common. The stretch might be a little bit more, but that can back up quite a bit as well. I don't know if national chains look at that and look at traffic flow and that kind of thing before they cite. They
I'm sure
may.
they do. I'm sure
Yeah,
they do.
So,
But my point is, are we being more restrictive?
yes, I understand your
Here.
point, yes, because we can be, as
Right.
opposed to,
Shouldn't.
yeah.
Can I ask a question of Sonia?
Of course.
You know, when, I know that Harlem's a state road, and so then IDOT has jurisdiction over it. Is it only when we're adding or subtracting curb cuts that they get involved? So if we
Yes.
want to just put signage on a private property restricting turns, and we're allowed to, then.
I think we would be allowed to do that,
Okay.
yeah.
That's my understanding, I just want to make sure.
Like if we wanted to put in an actual little pork chop in there, that would be a different matter. But if
Right.
it's just signage, I think we have the ability to do that.
Right, that kind of thing triggers a lot of IDOT review.
I would say that IDOT would not allow that driveway to be where it is.
Right, if the site
At
was
this
being
time.
developed from scratch?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Good.
Yeah, it doesn't meet any sort of current standards, but it's an existing condition and they won't take away somebody's access, so.
So, do we think C has been met?
I would say that overall, the development of the site in this way will be in harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of the district in which it is located, which is the standard that has to be met at the very end of the sentence. So I say, yes, it's met. I think it might be desirable for the property owner to reach out to the village traffic engineer, or that someone looks at this, or perhaps if it's observed that there are problems with traffic flow, that someone tries to solve it as, solve the problem.
Even considering Commissioner Mendoza's commentary about permitted uses, I think this would be, I think C is met, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to provide an additional element of control or safety with certain turning restrictions.
Any dissent?
I don't feel that it needs C.
Okay. And can you elaborate?
Well, I don't think that it's appropriate for the location of the site with respect in particular to the streets giving access to it.
Because of the estimated number of cars coming in and out?
And the location of the driveways
Yeah.
and the amount of traffic at that location.
Isn't that more towards condition E, though?
I don't know that it's parking necessarily that I'm concerned.
Well, entrance and exit
Entrances and
drives
drives.
to prevent traffic hazards. I think that's the concern you're articulating, rather than, harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of the district.
Okay.
Well, let's move on to D. The location, nature, and height of buildings, walls, and fences, and the nature and extent of the landscaping on the site are such that the use will not unreasonably hinder or discourage the appropriate development and use of adjacent land and buildings. Any concerns there?
No.
No, since we're using an existing building.
E, parking areas will be of adequate size for the particular use, properly located and suitably screened from adjoining uses, and the entrance and exit drives will be laid out so as to prevent traffic hazards and nuisances. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about is, by definition, little children will be in this parking lot.
Yeah, and as I said during the discussion part, I think we just don't have enough input on whether there's a plan in place to prevent traffic hazards or not. And we've had discussion on consultation with a traffic engineer, get their review, and have recommendations on how pickup and drop-off should be structured. So I would, propose that that becomes a condition in some form or another on the granting of satisfaction of condition E.
The way I read condition E, or standard E, contemplates a prospective development where drives are to be laid out at some future time, as opposed to this existing parcel that is already established, and we know what they are. So, good or bad, they are there. They're not going to be laid out.
But doesn't it go to the first part of the sentence, parking areas will be adequate size for particular use? I mean, that implies ingress and egress.
I don't think the concern is with parking. I think it is.
Well, it says parking areas are of adequate size, and I think that implies ingress and egress as well.
I think I think we're talking about two different things, but I'm looking at the word will, implying something in the future, i.e. future construction. So I support Commissioner Mendoza's interpretation of this is more aimed at a proposed development rather than existing features.
Attorney Mars, any case law on this?
Not that I'm aware of this particular wording.
Do you interpret it the same way? That it's for future construction and development and not
I think
existing?
it could be read either way. So
When
I'll leave it up to you.
when a proposed use is introduced to an existing site, you still have the opportunity to change the ingress, the egress, and certainly the parking of that site. So will be can still apply to an existing site with a new use, and should be.
That's a good point. Director App, you mentioned a traffic engineer. Are you referring to the firm that did the traffic study in Riverside?
We can have them look at it, or we can have Christopher Burke Engineering, our village engineer, look at it. If they feel it's something that they can't adequately look at, they can certainly refer us to KLOA to look at it.
So if we were to recommend that condition and the board went along with that, would the expense be on the petitioner?
Yes.
Okay.
So if we have to incur professional services, we have the ability to draw that down from their application fee, and anything that is above and beyond the application fee, then we can invoice them for that additional review.
Thank you. So for E, I hear some don't feel that that standard has been met. Do some of you think it has been, or not concerned by it?
That seems like an accurate read of the
Trying to read the room. F, the proposed use.
Oh,
will-
I'm sorry, before you go on to F, I guess my concern, in addition to the traffic flow, would be, my preference would be that the employees were required to park in the lot. There are parking spots in the lot. I personally would prefer that they were required to park, for the most part, in the lot. I sensed earlier when we talked about this that potentially some of the other commissioners might not be in agreement with me, but I would prefer that they weren't parking long-term, even if it's 2 shifts of cars, parking in front of the residential homes.
Thank you for that.
So I would suggest that maybe we just say that they would not park on the residential streets.
That's, yeah, how I wrote it.
You know, if the other
As-
commissioners were in agreement with that. I
As
got the
opposed to
sense that,
requiring them to park in the lot, is my point.
I got it,
Okay,
okay, yeah.
right, that's appropriate, right.
Right, because they could park out there.
Right.
I can't support that. I don't think we make any such restriction on any other business in town.
We do, don't we?
I would, do we? Any of the businesses along Harlem? Where do they park?
I don't know, but we
We
have
have some
restrictions
areas
on
we have
employee parking on
parking.
Burlington and Quincy. Right?
Yeah, so we do have parking limitations in different areas, I think specifically to address long-term commuter parking issues. So we have limited hours for
And
how
this-
long somebody can park, you know, like say on Quincy. Similarly
this-
on Lawton, I think
And
we have
that's
it.
fine, but that is very different than telling people where they specifically must park. That is simply a restriction on, can you park on this street for so many hours? And that applies to everyone who drives by. That is not
It's a general-
specific, that is
Yeah.
not specific, thank you.
It's generally applicable to
It's
everything.
generally
Yes.
applicable. It is not specific to the employees of any given establishment. And that's more where I was aiming at.
And I raised it because the petitioner specifically put it in her request that the employees were going to be parking on the street. And so since it was part of the specific request, my request back would be, please don't park on the residential streets. Now, whether that's part of the, you know, official approval from my, you know, from my stance, it doesn't necessarily need to be part of, you know, if it was just me voting, part of the official request, or it's just, you know, potentially it's just a request to the petitioner.
Would that request be in the standing of Riverside's policies or against it?
So, well, I think we direct our businesses in the downtown to utilize the employee parking in the rear, but additionally, as the stick end, it is limited hour parking on Burlington. So it's not like you can park on Burlington all day long. So if somebody's going to has their business in the downtown and they need to park there, technically the parking is 4 hours or something like that, or 3 hours on Burlington. So that's why we offer the business parking in the rear along the railroad tracks so that the employees can park there and keeps the on-street parking open for the patrons. So somewhat, you know, we try to have carrots and sticks to keep employees off of the on-street parking where the patrons can go, or off of the parking areas where the residents are. If it's further down the street, we don't want to be pushing the parking further down into the residential areas. So we have not made, you know, I'm thinking of like Vault Escape. They had to get a special use. They have no parking. And so it's on-street parking either on Herrick or on Harlem Avenue. And we didn't make any sort of specific restrictions on them in regards to parking. Her hope was that you'd be getting large groups together so there wouldn't be as many cars coming to her establishment, and also that she'd be getting people that would be taking the train and would be just walking up the block from the Harlem Avenue station to her location. So historically, as far as employee parking or, you know, even visitor parking, we haven't really stuck anything to a special use just yet, even incidences where there is no available parking on site.
Well, I have 4 potential conditions, so let's discuss those at the end, and we can talk about whether to include those. F, the proposed use will not cause substantial injury to the value of the other property in the neighborhood.
I don't think
Being
so.
that there have been no objections from the neighbors, I would say no.
Okay. And finally, G, at least 1 year has elapsed since denial by the village. That doesn't apply here. Okay, so the conditions I've written down, Commissioner Mahul's request for right-in, right-out, no left turn onto Harlem. Is that a condition we would like to place?
I would think that would be dictated by the traffic engineer on what makes the most sense for traffic flow on that site.
I understand your point, but I think in this case, looking at general commercial use and considering trying just other high-traffic streets, it's not an uncommon thing to have.
Well, let's skip down to number 3. Do we want to include as a condition a study by some engineer in terms of traffic?
To what end? Engineer to tell us what? It's high, I mean, we know the general parameters. It's high volume, high traffic area, and if you have, X number of more cars coming in and out, you're gonna, add to the congestion. Which is what I suspect would probably be the case. And he's gonna say you shouldn't turn left onto Harlem.
And I sort of led us down this path, and, I tend to agree we don't necessarily need an engineer study, but some proposal on traffic ingress and egress and how the cars are going to get in and out during the high volume areas would be nice to have addressed in this application.
If we could have and I don't want it to get too costly for everybody's sake, but if we could have some type of analysis done that says the best, ingress and egress patterns here at this time would be do this, and maybe in the afternoons it's not the same, it's try and do this. I mean, I think if it was limited to something like that.
I agree.
Perhaps the limit would be the applicant's fee.
I could support something like
When we
that.
start talking about professional services, it has to be a memo style report. We're not looking for a full-blown
Right.
traffic counts and everything else study. That's the only way that I would support a study.
I mean, I would just like to see some sort of plan by anybody. I mean, what's the plan to get people in and out as opposed to just let them fend for themselves?
Director Rapp, do you think you could articulate something like that for the village board? Or does this sound still a little too vague?
I think I can. I think some of the issue with it is distribution. So are we thinking that most of the people coming to this are going to be Riverside residents, and they're going to be maybe coming from Long Common already and turning in and then exiting out on Harlem to go off to wherever it is they're going off to? Are we thinking that a majority of these people are going to be coming from Berwyn or North Riverside, and are they going to be coming from the east and from the north on Harlem and coming down and coming in and then going back out onto Harlem? So I think those are kind of the questions that kind of inform what is going to be the best travel. So when you look at gas stations, gas stations are a matter of convenience. And you go to the gas station that's on your right-hand side or where you're going to be turning, and that's why they like to be on intersections, and you'll see them on opposing intersections. So northbound traffic that needs to get gas is going to go to the gas station that's on that side of the street, so they can just turn right in, fill up, turn right back out, and continue on their way. People that are going southbound, they may prefer to go to a Shell, but that's not going to work for them because the Shell is on the opposite side of the street, and they'd have to make a left-hand turn and then right into it, and it's not easy. So they go to the one that is on their side of the street, and that's where they turn. So that's...
I would say yes, and I would just kind of go with the idea that over time, as patrons come and go, they will figure out the best and most convenient way that works for them to get from A to B. And
So-
then that would be the assumptions that I would have the study make, is that like all traffic, it develops organically and it figures out a way, much like what you just described.
Right, so ultimately, what's the recommendation going to be on how people should enter or exit? I don't know if they're gonna be able to give a firm answer or not necessarily knowing. There's just gonna have to be assumptions that made, 50% of the traffic is gonna come from Harlem Avenue and 50% of the traffic is gonna come from Long Common. And if you're coming from Long Common, the best way to enter is going to be turning left from Long Common into the shopping center as opposed to turning left out into Harlem to turn left back in. So,
Or it's parking on Bird Road and walking your kids over there. If we're going to be asking for professional services, then we're also trusting that their judgment will be good.
right,
And they know what they're doing.
so,
I don't know.
So.
The only
Would
other
we
comment
rather-
I would make is that the property owner apparently didn't think that it was going to impact the flow of his business and the Chinese restaurant's business. So presumably there has been another set of eyes saying this is a desirable tenant for me. And, so that decision has been made. So maybe that supports the concept that this is not likely to be an insuperable obstacle as people driving cars into and out of the parking lot. So maybe we shouldn't ask for a traffic engineer's opinion, and it's a waste of time.
Especially since we don't know from where the cars are coming.
I mean, again, I don't think we need a professional plan. I would just like to understand some sort of setup on how you're going to direct parents to come into the site. I mean, the question is, do they come down Harlem and go into the driveway? Do they come down Harlem, take a right on a Long Common, and come in through the side? I mean, there's a number of ways to come in and out. I'd just like to have part of the presentation to the board include what's that traffic plan. Because right now it's
I'd be
just
okay with
figure it
that.
out.
I would be okay with the petitioner having a flyer that she hands out to her patrons and says, this is what we want you to do. That's not uncommon. We've seen that happen with the grade schools in the area where they try and give parents direction on here's how you're going to do your drop-offs and pickups. That's a reasonable solution.
So that would not be a condition to the special use, that would just be a recommendation that at the board presentation, there would be more information provided.
That's
Right.
reasonable.
you can make that a condition of approval that they prepare a plan.
Yeah, either way, I think it's fine to put it as a condition that the applicant provide an ingress and egress plan for drop-off and pickup times
Okay.
for consideration by the board.
Are we comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So back to no left turn onto Harlem. Do we want that to be a condition?
I do, but
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Condition that the petitioner and the landlord agree to work with the village on cross-access moving forward? Do you want that as a condition? Or is that getting too far ahead of reality?
I think it might be getting too far ahead. I certainly would not, assuming that this petition is approved or close to being approved, I certainly wouldn't want to torpedo it because the landlord decides he's not going to commit right now whether he wants to agree to future cooperation on an easement.
Other thoughts?
None.
I think that's fair. It's too unknown at this point.
Okay?
I
And
guess,
then,
I guess I would ask Director Apt, is it ever too early to just mention to the owner that we're thinking of doing this? Not related at all to this application or anything, just mention, you know, as we look
It's been
to that
mentioned.
develop. Okay, fine, fair enough.
And how has it been received, out of curiosity?
I don't think he's been opposed to it. I think he likes the idea of there being more opportunity for additional parking should an additional development come in that his patrons could utilize, or that could, you know, make his site perhaps more marketable because there is access to additional parking.
Right.
If that, so I have a feeling that would be his angle on any future development, would be the ability for the parking to be shared. I think that was more of a driver to it, so.
and then last, how about a condition that employees not park on Riverside residential streets?
I understand the sentiment, but no. I think existing parking restrictions are the way to go, and if we need more signs, then we need more signs, and the residents need to make the case to the board that they need parking restrictions in front of their homes. I think that's the way the rest of the commuter restrictions have developed anyway.
I would concur with Commissioner Mahul.
As would I.
Right, I agree with that. There can always be restricted parking hours established for that area, just as they are in other parts of Riverside. Agreed.
Sorry.
I obviously disagree, as stated prior.
So it sounds like a friendly amendment to the motion, including those two conditions, the no left turn onto Harlem and the recommendation to the board with an ingress-egress plan? Yes?
Said yes.
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 Acceptable to the mover and seconder?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, more discussion, or are we ready to vote?
Can I ask one clarifying question? The turn onto Harlem, the restriction, that doesn't include any restrictions on coming in and out from Long Island, correct?
No.
Okay.
If you look at the layout, the property layout on, I'm not sure what page it is, page 32, I don't believe that long common driveway, actually, I would guess that long common driveway does not actually belong to this property owner, and it's actually part of, it's village owned because it serves the alley. But I hesitate to make a super affirmative statement on that.
Okay.
But correct, I did not have any, I don't think they're necessary.
Understood, thank you.
So your interpretation is the only driveway off of Long Common is basically blocked by parking, if someone chooses to park in that location?
The way this plan looks, yes, that is correct.
Just want to confirm.
That's
that.
my assumption.
Yeah.
You don't think cars can drive behind what's parked, is what you're saying?
I don't think that's a desirable travel path, and I think the majority of people are going to favor the convenience of getting off onto Harlem as much as that is inconvenience.
Right, I agree with that. I guess I was just thinking, in your estimation, you don't envision that cars could fit behind a parked car.
I don't think they're gonna want to.
Well, if they're going to the Riverside train station, they might.
Put it this way, well, if they're going to the Riverside train station, then the right out is actually helpful because they're going south
Yeah,
on Harlem.
you're right, on Harlem, you're right.
I mean, the distance that is shown here is 21 feet and change. How long is a car?
It's, a basic spot is 20 feet. So
So essentially,
these
thank you.
people are maneuvering on, the parking maneuvering is on the sidewalk,
Right, okay, so just
right?
right,
So there's, yeah, you would
Yes.
have to drive on the sidewalk.
I don't recommend that.
Me either.
So again, to vote yes on the special use, we need to think that all of the use standards are met.
Correct.
More discussion? Call the roll, please.
All right, Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Pelletier?
No.
Commissioner Scanlon?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannan?
Yes.
Commissioner Merhol?
Yes.
Commissioner Mendoza?
Yes.
Chairperson Mateo?
Yes.
Motion passes.
So we are a recommending body. It next goes to the village board, and they make the approval or not, and probably the second meeting in November at the earliest, which would be November 15th. But Director App will keep you up to date on the progress. So thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Okay. So now we can call to order the public hearing PZ 18-06. I'll note that all the commissioners are still present. All in favor for opening up that meeting? Aye. All right. So this is a text amendment to remove vacation rentals as a permitted use in residential zoning districts and to make vacation rentals a special use in commercial zoning districts. If we so choose to recommend that, we will consider proposed text amendments which include, but may not be limited to, amending Section 10.4.5, Use and Bulk Requirement Tables, Table 2, Residential Districts Permitted Uses, and Section 10.5.9, Use and Bulk Requirement Tables, Table 4, Business Districts Permitted Uses, to remove vacation rentals as a permitted use in the residential zoning districts, and to consider changing their designation from permitted use to a special use in the business zoning districts. The petitioner is the Village of Riverside. Notice of public hearing was published on the October 3rd of the Landmark and will be entered into the record as an exhibit. We're not going to swear you in, so you can start with your summary, please.
Okay, as you may recall, back in 2016, the board adopted a text amendment that would allow vacation rentals in the Village of Riverside. There was some concern by this commission as we were going through that process about allowing this type of use in our residential districts, so therefore the code amendments included certain restrictions to help ensure the use's impact on the neighborhoods was minimized. With those proposed restrictions for licensing, including a limitation to 60 rental days in a calendar year, the village board chose to allow vacation rentals as a permitted use rather than a special use, which bed and breakfasts are classified as in our residential zoning districts. Both vacation rentals and bed and breakfasts are permitted uses in our business districts. In July 2018, in response to some concerns that were shared by residents about vacation rentals in residential areas, the board began discussing changes to our licensing regulations in order to better address those issues, which included the number of visitors, noise, parking, and traffic issues. Ultimately, on September 20th, the board adopted an ordinance that removes the vacation rental license from the residential districts. The ordinance also included some other changes to the licensing regulations that they had discussed over the summer. They determined that vacation rentals were not an appropriate use for the residential neighborhoods and would be best suited for our business districts. Since vacation rentals are listed as permitted uses in our residential zoning districts in our zoning ordinance, a text amendment is also needed for vacation rentals to be prohibited in our residential districts. The board also requested that the commission consider changing vacation rentals from permitted uses to special uses in our business districts. There were some trustees that expressed concern that a vacation rental in a condominium building could have the same negative impacts on a condominium building as could on a residential neighborhood. And this would allow some additional notification and licensing requirements. So the board has incorporated notification and village board approval process as part of the licensing requirements in the ordinance that they adopted, those modifications to the licensing requirements. However, if the Planning and Zoning Commission does recommend changing the use to a special use, those requirements could be removed then from the licensing requirements, since the special use would have to go provide the notification to the neighbors, have a hearing before you, and ultimately go to the village board for approval. Since that's part of the special use process. The new licensing requirements and restrictions for vacation rentals include that the vacation rental property must be the owner's primary residence. Doesn't mean that the owner has to be on site during the rental period, but it does mean that this property does need to be their primary residence. We changed the minimum stay to 2 nights, restricting outdoor activities between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. The village's quiet hours of 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. need to be clearly posted in the vacation rental. Prohibits utilizing the vacation rental property as a venue for weddings, conferences, parties, or other events. Maximum of 2 guest rooms in a vacation rental with a maximum occupancy of 6 guests. Visitors are prohibited, and the maximum number of days that it can be rented out as a vacation rental would remain at 60 days. That did not change. So the proposed amendment before you removes the vacation rental use from the residential use table, which therefore makes it a prohibited use in all of our residential districts. It also changes the use designation in our business districts, so both the B1 and the B2, from permitted to special. Just for everybody's kind of edification, our business districts do allow for a mix of commercial uses and higher density residential uses, including condominiums, apartments, and townhouses. So you kind of get an idea of what sort of residential uses are in our business districts. We have apartment buildings. You would not be able to have a vacation rental in an apartment building because it's not owner. You have to own your unit in order to be able to get a license. So that would leave you looking at townhouses or condominium buildings, condo units. So you have the text amendment before you. I provided you, I thought I had included in the packet, but apparently I had missed that page when I was kind of compiling everything together. I did provide a little map that shows, a sort of little map that kind of outlines where our business districts are, so you can see where the B2 district is, and then where the B1 and B1's, the B1C and TC kind of districts are located in the village. So you can see where it's mostly the downtown area, the small little bit at Cowley and Burlington, and then primarily along Harlem Avenue is where our B1 districts are. So you have that information before you. I also provided you with the ordinance that the board did adopt, changing the vacation rental license requirements, so you do have that for your reference. Did get an email from Commissioner Miller with some questions about some of those requirements, so Attorney Mars and I are happy to go over those with you and answer any questions that you have. You know, like I said, this was kind of a long process with the village board over the summer and the fall, trying to figure out how they wanted to move forward with vacation rentals, and ultimately where they landed is they did not feel that they were an appropriate use in the residential districts, and so hence the removal of them from the use table, so they will be prohibited. And then you have the business district before you to make your recommendation on as well. So.
So by removing it from as a permitted use, it de facto then becomes a prohibited use?
Yes.
We don't have to do anything about that?
Correct.
Okay.
So all it has to just show in the strike through, then it'll be taken out of the table, and therefore, since it's only listed in the business district tables, that would be the only district that they would be allowed in, as whatever designation we decide.
Right, so that part is housekeeping, because the village, or the board has already said it's out of the residential district.
So that, so that essentially conforms to what the board has already decided.
Correct.
Do we need to vote on that?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a technicality. It has to, you need a recommendation to go to the board because that's what state law says, but
I'm just wondering, should we just vote on that right now and just be done with it, or should we talk about the other aspects first, or?
either way. If there's consensus on the second part, then we can just vote on it and take one vote.
Yeah, unless,
And if there's not, then we can do separate votes.
yes, thank you for articulating what I was unable to do. So questions for Director Abt? So-
I have a question on, in the write-up, it's on page 36, section 6, the new licensing requirements that were proposed by the village board. I guess I'm confused why there's a maximum of 2 guest rooms. If we're imposing a maximum occupancy of 60 guests, does it really matter how many guest rooms they offer?
I suppose it doesn't technically matter. I think it was kind of an evolving conversation, is how can we limit it? And I think they don't necessarily want to see the ability for there to be a large number of guests.
Right.
And if you,
And I did watch those conversations, and that was a very good way of articulating it, that it was evolving and changing as they talked about the different elements. I guess I'm just wondering.
they seem pretty sold on, they wanted to limit it to two rooms.
Okay.
A maximum of 2 guest rooms that you would be able to
Rent out.
rent.
Yes.
Okay.
So have you thought about how you would license that? Would you and the fire department approve 2 specified rooms if it's a 3-bedroom?
That would be
location?
information we would be asking from the petitioner. So they would need to designate to us so we can confirm any of the rooms work and meet, occupancy requirements, and it's not some like random closet they've turned into a room and are trying to be able to rent out. So we have to verify that it meets life safety code requirements. But we would be asking for them to say, okay, if they have more than 2 rooms, which rooms are you going to be renting out? And if there's one room that definitely wouldn't meet the code, then we would specifically state that that room would not be allowed to be one of the rooms that they utilize for the vacation rental.
So if it was a 1-room unit condo, a studio condo, then the guest room is the unit, right? And so
Yeah.
therefore, but as you pointed out, it just needs to pass the
Right.
inspection.
Inspection. So in the case, obviously it's a little bit different now because the rules have changed. But with the previous set of rules and the one licensee that we had, we restricted the top floor that had a bedroom in it because there just wasn't adequate egress from it, and it being as high as it was. So that was prohibited from being a room for the guests. So they were not allowed to utilize that area as part of the vacation rental. So, and we made that a specific condition of the license. Because the fire department didn't feel it was a safe place for guests to be. Especially ones that aren't necessarily as familiar with the house, et cetera, that it would be best that not be utilized for the vacation rental. So we have historically put restrictions related to life safety concerns and what can be used for the vacation rental and what cannot.
So if a petitioner came forward and said our maximum occupancy is 6 guests, we have 2 bedrooms, so those would be considered the guest rooms, and we were envisioning 2 people in each of those and 2 people on a pull-out in the living room, that's not allowed.
No. Not the way we defined a guest room.
Which goes back to your point about keeping in the maximum, to get to the board's intent, keeping in the maximum of the 2 guest rooms.
So when this went to the village board from PZC, they didn't follow our recommendation to make vacation rentals a special use because they didn't want to impose that financial obligation with the special use application. They want to encourage people to apply. But now they are recommending that we change it back to a special use. So in addition to the $500 license, that the special use application is how much?
Special use application is $1,000.
And they don't get any of that back, right?
They do. So special uses and like text amendment application fees are considered as a deposit. So whatever costs that are incurred, if they are less than the $1,000, then we can refund the remaining amount. So the costs for the mailing and the publication, those kind of costs, if there's any attorney's costs related to drafting the ordinance, we deduct all that, and then the remainder can be returned to the applicant. So, and if it goes over that amount, then we can bill for the additional amount that things go over.
So you have one pending application. Do you have a sense yet as to how much of the $1,000 will be used up? Putting you on the spot, sorry.
I don't know. I would say typically we average around $500 to $600 for special use applications, that kind of thing. It's a rare day that a public notice costs less than $300. It's usually right around $300 or a little over $300 for the public notice to get published, and then you have the additional mailing costs and whatever the attorney's fees are. So typically you're looking at around $500, maybe a little bit more, and so like half of it gets refunded to the applicant. Things that are a little bit more contentious require a little bit more review, involvement of a plan reviewer or involvement of the engineer or more attorney reviews, things like that, then the costs start to go up. So.
Thoughts, questions on making vacation rentals in the business district a special use?
Doesn't seem necessary to me. I think it should be a permitted use in the business district, especially with all of the restrictions.
I apologize, you said you think it should be or should not be?
I think it should not be a special use. I think it should be a permitted use in the business districts.
Okay, thank you.
To clarify, the choice seems to be between permitted use with the restrictions that are in the ordinance or special use, and then the board will take away some of the restrictions in the ordinance. Is that?
Very few of them, though.
Right, the restrictions that would be removed would really be the approval process by the board. So right now,
Thank you.
as it stands now, someone would apply, and there would still be a mailing, and the board would review based on standards that are in there. And then they come back for their first renewal. But if it was a special use, that would all happen here instead, essentially. Except for the renewal part, they wouldn't come back for renewal necessarily. Unless that was a condition that you imposed.
I think I understand where Commissioner Pelletier is coming from, and I can appreciate what you're thinking, but I think given our recent history with what's gone on and the newness of this concept to this village, that at this point, I would support keeping it, making it a special use, and perhaps years down the line with experience under the village's belt, then it could be transferred into a permitted use. I agree that the restrictions seem fairly tight, but, you know, unforeseen things could come up. People who do live in the neighboring areas to a vacation rental in the business district in a condominium building or whatever may have issues that we are not foreseeing right now, and rules have to be enforced. So, you know, I think this requires that they have the license is for 1 year length and it has to be renewed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
That's correct.
So I think it would be better to have some experience with this before we make it into a permitted use.
So what safeguard does the special use option provide the village? We'll have someone come before this commission, make a presentation.
It affords the neighbors the opportunity to come to a public hearing, to voice any concerns that they have. I guess it's more of a generally accepted legal process.
I mean,
And
barring some concrete, you know, data or incident that someone's gonna be able to present and say, this is a bad unit for this, or we've had problems with this particular, you know, owner. Absent something like that, I don't know what basis we would have to turn down a special use. They still have to go through the licensing process, correct? So I'm not sure what foresight this body would have to say yay or nay, you can or cannot have that particular unit as a vacation rental.
So again, the special use process affords you the opportunity to put conditions on it that are specific to that request. If it goes through the village board process, the idea is that we formed that they can similarly do that. It's to sort of mimic the special use process without requiring it to go before this body. It would just all be handled by the village board.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. In my mind, I like special use because it's a way to address possible abuses. You know, in my mind, we have a lot of multi-unit buildings in the commercial district. If it's a permitted use, there would be nothing that would stop all 6 units in a 6-unit building to apply and become the, you know, Airbnb for the entire building for a particular weekend, and then you're back to having, you know, 30 people renting in under one roof. You know, we just can't foresee every potential abuse that's out there of what the intention is, and I like the idea of it coming to us, the neighbors being informed. So if there's a building where multiple units are working together to circumvent these rules, it gives us a quick opportunity, and then a quick opportunity to the neighbors to say, this is abusive, this can't be happening.
Further questions for Director Att?
Are there any, for those of you who were on the commission at the time that you discussed this previously, is there anything about the ultimate decision to require, you know, to propose the special use that you can recall that would be informative to the current composition of the commission? Like, do you recall anything that came up then that you remember that would be worth sharing as to why at that time you were proposing the special use?
I think the idea was that bed and breakfasts were already considered a permitted use. There's already kind of an expectation of a higher level of activity and things like that in the business district, that the commission wasn't as concerned about vacation rentals in the business districts. Their primary concern was the residential districts, and that's why they chose the special use for, or recommended the special use for the residential districts, because they saw that as having more of an impact on the character of the neighborhood or having specific impacts on neighbors. And so they wanted to provide that extra level of protection that they didn't necessarily see as quite as necessary in the business district, as kind of, and there just didn't seem to be a whole lot of concern. I think now that, at least on the village board's level, we kind of see this play out and the issues that have arisen from just one vacation rental, is that maybe this just needs to have some tighter controls on it. And, you know, as some of the trustees said, the impacts can be similar. There can still be noise complaints in a condo building coming from a vacation rental within it. There can be traffic or parking concerns related to the vacation rental. The hope is that the new additional regulations that are in there, that hopefully we're mitigating a lot of that by limiting, you know, more strictly limiting the number of guests that you can have, limiting the number of guest rooms that you can have, making it so that this has to be a primary residence. So it's not somebody's investment property that they're buying, that they're, you know, renting out for it to be a vacation rental, you know, throughout the year. Part of that is hopefully mitigated by limiting it to 60 calendar days in a year. And that was, I think, kind of the idea of the commission to begin with, was that 60 days afforded some time, but was not too much of the year, that it wouldn't make it financially workable for somebody to make that an investment property to be a full-time vacation rental. It would still need to be somebody's residence. So I think given kind of some of the bumps that we've had in the road, I don't necessarily think that it's not prudent to say that, even within a condo building and hearing things that are happening in Chicago and some other communities, maybe it's not necessarily a bad idea to have that extra level of protection, because there can be impacts, maybe even greater impacts in a condo building versus in a residential neighborhood where there is more space between your neighbors. So I'm not necessarily opposed to erring on the side of caution on this one, given kind of the steep learning curve that there is with these new kind of uses and how they impact an area. And again, we haven't had one that's been in a condo unit yet, technically. So far, I haven't received any complaints about the one that has currently applied but has not received their license yet. But she has rented it out on a couple of occasions, even though she didn't have her license yet. But
Are you
we're
aware?
on the same page now.
Are you aware, although this is probably greater detail than you get into at this point, of any condo units in town that currently prohibit short-term rentals like this?
I have not heard that we have them, but I
Village Center?
think I heard the Village Center has passed bylaws that says you can't do that. But I've not seen those bylaws yet, so.
So Sonia, this has been, vacation rentals have been permitted, what, now 3 years since we did that?
2 years.
2 years?
Mhm.
And how many applications have you had since?
2 now, only 1 license has been issued. And that one expires later this year. So,
I understand that the situation with the prior one was not good. But I think that was a bump in the road, not bumps. And I think this is a bit, especially in light of the much more stringent licensing that's gonna take place. I think this is a bit of an overreaction to make it a special use as opposed to permitted. I didn't think there was ever gonna be much demand for this, and there really wasn't, with only 2 applications in 2 years. So, I think it's a bit of an overreaction.
And the licensing requirement, it requires notification. Is that meaning notification of the neighbors?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then presentation to the village board. So basically, the special use just makes them come to us and then to the village board, as opposed to just going to the village board. Really, the village board has all of the same abilities to put restrictions or do what we might do if it was a special use.
That's
We're
how
just
Attorney Mars-
advocating our,
If Attorney Mars
Review.
could, sorry, go on.
Sure,
Sorry,
no,
Attorney.
that's-
Could you, item, sorry, paragraph D of 326-4, and it says, it's just easier to read it. I'll read it in part. The Board of Trustees can attach to the license appropriate conditions, including granting a license for a probationary period. Doesn't that probationary period give the board even more ability to shut down an operation than
Right,
a special use would?
Yes, although you could impose a probationary period as a condition too. If you had specific concerns you were looking at, if you had residents here saying, we believe this is gonna be noisy and out of control and whatever. We've had instances of past special uses, I don't know if necessarily in Riverside, but I think maybe early on, for instance, when Molly's first got a music license, right? That a probationary period was created in order to see how it went.
Okay, and,
Because of concerns.
but given that, I'm not sure, and I'm kind of maybe parroting rather than creating new ideas here. I don't know that planning and zoning necessarily needs to be adding our own 2 cents to this when it really ends up being a board decision in the end anyway.
Sure. That's a fair
I'd
way to
rather
look at
leave it there than have us become the forum for noise complaints.
On the other hand, neighbors would have 2 public hearings to voice their thoughts, both PZC and the board. And I've heard multiple times that people are not comfortable necessarily speaking up at board meetings. So this might be a more comfortable situation for them to be able to say, yeah, we don't want that there because of X, Y, or Z. So that's one argument in favor of making it a special use is, again, giving the neighbors more opportunities and perhaps a more inviting environment for some. Nothing against the Board of Trustees.
However, this commission has a much lower profile, so people may not even think about coming. I don't know, I think these are all good points. You don't want to make extra process if it's not going to be of benefit. And the board has already taken on a lot of the burden here of having these hearings for every licensee, so, I don't know.
And the reality is we're a recommending board, so it's really up to the board, or a recommending commission, so. Seems like just extra process without any benefit.
I guess I'm wondering what the board would think if we didn't require the special use. I think in what they discussed, I think they're assuming we're going to do a special use, although they came to us to get that approval. Am I misreading it? You, Commissioner Pelletier, you had...
I said that we might consider it, I'm not sure.
Right. I guess I'm just thinking back maybe to their verbal discussions that they were thinking it would be special use. So I'm not saying that should make us go one way or the other, but I guess I'm just wondering if we don't do it, are they just going to override it anyways? I don't know.
I think it was more along the lines of asking the PZC to take a look at it.
Okay.
And determine whether they thought it was appropriate.
Okay.
Is that your
Yeah,
recollection?
and I think as their own safeguard, they wanted to keep in there the notification requirements.
But
And
they
then it
were
was brought
open-
up that there would be 2 simultaneous processes then if we went the special use route. And so then the discussion was that, well, if they decide to do that, then we would take out that requirement within the licensing requirements, because that would already be handled as part of the zoning review process versus the licensing requirement. So, but I think they'll be fine with it either way. I think they still at least initially want that level of review and control over it for these licenses going forward. And it does make it easier for them to change it if things seem to be fine. If it's just in the licensing requirements, that can be changed a little bit easier than zoning.
Well, but
If all those
another,
regulations were in the zoning code.
another thing that's been discussed is the use in bulk table says that in the business districts, they're permitted, but they're really not if they still have to go to the board and be vetted. They're not really permitted.
Well, that's a separate set of, I mean, just like any business, there's licensing requirements that go along with getting something. So permitted just means they don't need any special zoning approvals. But they still have to go through whatever the licensing regulations are, in which case, in this particular case, this process was created to go before the board, so.
With notification, so
Yes,
it's a little different.
right. No, I understand.
It would be nice to have a board liaison here to ask. What do they really, or what are they really wanting here? Do they want to take on this burden of these hearings?
They want the special use.
They would prefer the special use. You know that, okay, that's
Well, I
good.
mean, it was discussed at the board meeting.
Okay, I didn't see that discussion.
That's why this is in front of us. Would you concur?
But if this commission approves a special use, how much of a resource requirement is it once it then goes to the board for approval of a recommendation? It's not an entirely new hearing. The
No.
petitioner is not in front
So
of,
if it's a special use, there's a requirement that there be a public hearing. That public hearing takes place here. Now, that doesn't mean people don't have a right to go and say something to the board during public comment or while it's being debated in addition, but that legally, they're not swearing people in or doing other things that take.
but the
place.
petitioner goes to the board in case the board has any questions of the petitioner at that
Absolutely,
point,
yeah, that's
basically.
very common.
But it's not as formal, okay.
Right.
And absolutely, if one thinks that this should remain a permitted use, that's how one should vote.
Yeah, so in some cases, just for efficiency's sake, when these things get delegated to a commission to make a recommendation, the thought is that all the back and forth with neighbors and everything takes place here, so that the board is kind of just conducting its business without the distraction of all that activity. But, that can still happen anyways. And in a contested matter, it almost always does. But that's just one of the reasons that boards have these recommended bodies.
So I get the sense we should have 2 votes.
Yes.
Okay, so would somebody would like to make a motion about changing the text in table 1045 regarding residential districts permitted uses?
So moved. Did you already do that, Ed?
I don't think we did that yet.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Sonia, will call the roll, please.
Commissioner Marvel?
Aye.
Commissioner Mendoza?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner Scanlon?
Aye.
Commissioner Hannon?
Aye.
Chairperson Mateo?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Would somebody like to make a motion concerning 1059, Table 4, Business Districts Permitted Uses? And be explicit about your motion, please. Are you recommending accepting or rejecting the proposed text amendment?
The proposal before you does have it changed to a special use. That's the amendment that was in the packet.
So I guess this is, I'm not trying to make, I'm a little confused. If we make a motion to approve this change, how do the licensing requirements sort of shift into the special use hearing process in front of the commission? I mean, there doesn't seem to be a provision for that to happen and for it to be taken out of the existing ordinance.
Right, so that is all outside the zoning code. So if this recommendation went forward, we would either in the same ordinance or as in a corresponding one, remove those notification process as part of the licensing requirements.
So the board would have a new ordinance drafted?
Yes,
Okay, that would.
For that chapter.
right.
And then would those specific provisions, conditions be put into the zoning code for this type of?
No,
or
we
it's
we have our regular special use standards that you would use to govern these decisions. So we don't need to add anything specific. We have the mailing requirement and we have the consideration of whether it's an appropriate use for that particular location.
And what about all the specific conditions of quiet hours and?
No,
this and
that all stays.
That all stays in the licensing?
Right, there's only
Okay.
2 sections really that we would be looking at. The license renewal section and the license approval procedures for new licenses. Those are the ones that would be affected by your decision to make this a special use. Everything else, all that other stuff about quiet hours and parking requirements and insurance, that all stays.
Stay under the licensing provisions
Under the licensing
for
provisions.
vacation rentals?
Yes.
Okay.
So those would be considered the standard if you wanted to make something different or more restrictive than what those are. You could make that as a condition of your recommendation for the special use.
So could I go back to the financial implications? So we talked about the fee for the special use application, and then there's a license fee. Does the license fee change if we add a notice element onto that? If it's not part of the special, if we don't approve the special use, does the license fee go up?
No, the license fee went up because of the notification requirement and some of the additional staff time that we've discovered that it takes in going through and doing those occupancy and fire inspections for those. So the board chose to raise that rate to accommodate the notification requirement as well as the amount of time that staff takes having to kind of go through the inspection processes for this. So they recommended that. One of the things they were discussing is if we did go the special use route, would they want to either waive the application fee or waive the license fee so that they wouldn't be charged basically twice as much, so.
And did they decide, or they're waiting for us?
Right,
to
no,
recommend?
ultimately, they decided to leave both, because any business that goes and gets a special use is still paying a business licensing fee. Now, maybe they would choose to make it lower if the notification went away, but there's still, fire inspections and other staff time that go into it. So they didn't want to not be able to recoup those costs.
Got it. So on a case-by-case basis, they might choose to waive the notification fee if there actually was a savings, or your staff might.
They
choose to
may, if we go the special use route, they may choose as part of the vacation rental license requirements, in addition to removing the notification requirements there, they may choose to reduce the fee amount.
Reduce the
license fee
business
amount.
license fee.
Right, okay,
Yep.
all right. Thank you for that.
I have a question. The notification requirement in the licensing procedure is intended to do what? Give notice to the neighbors.
That was intended for our current license, since we were thinking that we wanted to go the special use route, was to basically any licenses that came in the meantime would still at least have to provide notification to the neighbors and go to the village board for approval.
Right,
So,
but the notification provided to neighbors under the current situation allows the neighbors, gives the neighbors recourse to voice any concerns they have
Yes,
to the village board.
yes.
Okay.
Because one of the complaints that the board heard during this whole process was the neighbors, because the previous license that was issued was not a special use, it was a permitted use. So the neighbors didn't know about it until it was happening. And so the idea was, we want to make sure that neighbors are aware that this is happening and have an opportunity to voice their concerns.
The old process didn't require notification to the neighbors ahead of
No.
time, though?
Right.
Okay, so now they have that.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I will make the motion if no one else has anything else to say. I move that the code's 1059 use and bulk requirement tables be modified to change vacation rentals in the B1 and B2 subdistricts from permitted to special uses.
Is there a second? Well, I can second it. Right?
Technically, you can.
I'll second it. Sonia, please call the roll.
okay. Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Pelletier?
No.
Commissioner Scanlon?
Yes.
Commissioner Hannon?
Yes.
Commissioner Merhol?
No.
Commissioner Mendoza?
No.
Chairperson Mateo?
Yes.
All right, we have 4 ayes, so the motion passes.
Oh, I never closed the public hearing.
We can close it now.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oops. Okay. Next, we have old business, continued discussion and recommendations on porches, stoops, awnings, and canopies.
Okay. So, staff submitted the draft text amendment that the commission had worked on to the village board for direction on whether to move forward with a public hearing on the amendments. The village board reviewed the amendments, and they had some concerns regarding the amendment. Those concerns were, what is the difference between a covered stoop and a porch? With there being no definition of the new encroachment, how does one differentiate between the two? Trustees felt the description was too vague in the table and that a clear definition should be provided. They also recommended the use of illustrations. There was also some concern that the maximum size proposed had no meaning or basis in the building world and therefore was arbitrary. They directed the commission to move forward with a public hearing on the proposal, however asked that staff work with the commission on addressing the issues that they brought up. Given their feedback, staff believe the commission should have a little bit further discussion before proceeding with a public hearing on the text amendment. So some things to consider regarding landings and porches and stoops and entryways. I provided you some additional information to kind of help work through porches and stoops and size, et cetera, a little bit more. So one of the things I provided you with was some of the diagrams they have for the American with Disabilities Act in regard to clearance requirements for doors. So this idea of making it so that it's a size to accommodate the swing of a door. And that was one of the things that we talked about with stoops was just a 3x3 code compliant platform does not necessarily accommodate the pull side swing of like a storm door. And so people typically want something a little bit bigger than that. So this kind of shows some of those requirements as it relates to ADA, but I thought it was kind of like a helpful illustration. So with the ADA, there is a minimum requirement.
It's not applicable to residential, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So, but it's just, it kind of gives you an idea of kind of like industry standards and, you know, just kind of that idea of how do you accommodate a door that swings out and platform and how you access a door. So this kind of gives you an idea of either from the pull side coming in from the side or the direct approach. So when you see the arrows going to the side, that's, you know, approaching the door from the side versus the straight approach, and that's the arrow pointed directly at the door. So, but typically at a minimum, they require a 4-foot clearance coming straight out from the wall and between 18 and 24 inches to the side of the door for that pull side swing clearance. So if a door is 3 feet wide and you're looking at least 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet, preferably 24, so that's 2 feet, you're looking at a 5-foot wide area. And then coming out a minimum of 4 feet. If you're directly approaching it, they recommend 60-inch, which is a 5-foot clearance from the wall. So those are just some ideas to give you, because a stoop is typically going to have probably that pull swing door, and how do we accommodate that, and what is reasonable, what feels comfortable for somebody to be in that area and be in that space and be able to accommodate that movement. The other thing is thinking about the width of a stoop. Again, like I said, the ADA clearance requirements specify an additional 18 to 24 inches minimum to the pull side of the door. So that's that width component. Other things to consider, the proportionality of the stoop to the door or to the house, things like trying to meet other architectural elements, either be in a garage wall or a bay window projection. You know, sometimes you'll see them that they try to make it the width so it starts at the edge of one window and ends at the edge of the other window that flank the door, things like that. Those are things that people, you know, look at in designing or putting these kind of things in their front. on the fronts of their homes. What is most important in distinguishing a stoop from a porch? Is it size? Is it the covering or the covering type? Is it the use or the expectation of use of that area of the structure? And so those are things that we should look at adding to the definitions as we kind of like work through that. What is the primary purpose of the restrictions on stoops, landings, and similar structures serving a primary entry? Is it protecting the street yard? Is it aesthetics or design? Kind of what's our primary purpose in this regulation? And hopefully kind of thinking about that helps us frame the regulation a little bit, fine tune that a little bit more. And then definitions. So definitions that need to be added or revised can include stoop, open and or covered entryways, stoops or landings, primary entry, porch, there could be others. I provided you with our current definitions for porches and stoops. So you have the definition of a stoop, you have the definition of a porch, and then the definitions of an enclosed versus an unenclosed porch in the staff report. I also provided the dictionary definitions. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary website gave porch the definition of a covered area adjoining an entrance to a building and usually having a separate roof. Stoop definition was a porch, platform, entrance, stairway, or small veranda at a house door. And then I also provided the definition for a roof being the covering of the building. I've got the draft text amendment that we put together and put before the board, so we have that to kind of reference. I provided some definitions from the Planner's Dictionary, that's from the American Planning Association, for porches, stoops, and roofs, so we kind of have that to reference as we work through our discussion. And then I've included pictures of various entryways for the commission for us to play the fun game of, is it a stoop, is it a porch, is it neither? And some of those were ones provided by Commissioner Miller during some of our initial discussions, and then I've provided a few others. So I did kind of come up with a definition for a primary entry or an entryway to kind of like kick things off. So if we're going to be saying that this is something that is allowed, but only if it's serving a primary entry, then do we need to have a definition for primary entry? So for primary entry, I have the entranceway of a residence or other building closest to the public street or sidewalk, or one which would be reasonably perceived by the public to be the entrance to the dwelling available for public use. And then for entryway, the doorway into a building, along with the architectural treatments that accompany it. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of discuss the village board's concerns and provide staff and the village attorney with some feedback on the proposed draft text amendments and see if we're ready to kind of work towards a public notice, or if we need to kind of have some further discussion to flesh out some of the definition wordings, or if we're comfortable with what they are, we can move forward with it. But so we have that information. If you guys have any questions, if you kind of want to walk through some of the sample definitions that I provided, we can do that. Or we can jump right into the fun game of, is it a stoop, is it a porch, is it neither? I've got pictures up here that we can kind of go through. I've gone through preliminary and wrote down for myself what I think each of the things are, and so I'm interested to see what your reactions to. Is this a porch? Is this a stoop? Is it just an entry? Is it just a door? And so hopefully that kind of getting that discussion, if there's a difference in opinion, why do we have that difference in opinion, and why do we believe this is a porch versus a stoop, or a stoop versus a porch? So I think that will help us kind of flesh out definitions a little bit better as well. I think another thing that the commission struggled with was size and trying to get an idea of what size was. I have my tape measure here so we can, measure out what's 5 by 7, what's 9 by 3. Commissioner Marhoul, I think, brought something out too, so we can you can kind of sit in it and feel what 27 square feet feels like versus 36 square feet. So
our TV audience can't see these, but these are 1-foot square grids. Push these chairs back a little bit. So, tic-tac-toe style, this is 27 square feet in the boxes. This is 6 inches, but 3 times 9 is 27. So 9, that's 27 square feet. This adds 6 inches, and my paper was bigger.
And for clarity, it's again true that we're not including steps in these definitions of stoops or porches. So people shouldn't be confused to think, well, how are we going to get steps included? This is just the flat landing area.
Right, that would be the above grade area, and then whatever steps you need to get to grade and meet code would be allowed to encroach that much further.
And as a reality check, my recollection is that the petitioner for 173 gauge requested a landing of 3 feet by 13 feet, not an ADA compliant landing of 48 inches or 54 inches or anything like that. So they felt that that was acceptable, an acceptable size for their house.
Right, I think the landing itself was actually 4 feet, but their pillars projected out a little bit from the door, so there was like that 6-inch projection, so I think it came out further an additional 3 feet, 6 inches, but the actual landing itself, like at the door,
But where the
was
people
probably
would
4
stand, you're
feet.
saying there was like a railing that cut off part of that area, is that? But the place where a person could walk was 3 feet in depth? Is that,
I think it was 3 feet, 6 inches.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
And do you think 13 was the width?
That sounds right.
Do you know what month that was?
It was January.
It was January.
I think it was January.
I think it was January. The village board, according to the memo here, the staff memo, considered it in February.
Yeah, I know it was a 17 case number because they submitted the
Okay.
application in December, but I don't think the public hearing was until January. That sounds right.
So I don't know where we want to start. But I will just say what I consider a stoop to be is something more like a very simple landing without a covering, and not necessarily something that I would consider to be a primary entryway. And I know there are houses in Riverside and all over the world that have just a stoop-like entrance, but I think the idea was to allow people to have something slightly beyond a stoop. I don't think that necessarily means it has to be covered, like maybe a porch is considered it has to be covered, but it's something beyond the bare minimum of a stoop landing to comply with the building code.
So what's that?
I would call that an entry porch.
That's a porch.
Yeah, but it's an entry. It's not like a full-size porch, but it's an entry porch. It's something that's large enough. It's covered. It has pillars supporting it, columns supporting it. It provides more than a bare landing for ingress and egress, and it could accommodate perhaps 1 or 2 small chairs on either side. So it's more than a simple entry.
So there were nods over here about porch. What about this table?
I would concur with Commissioner for this picture.
Commissioner Hannon? Mendoza?
I think it's a porch.
All right, what about the next one?
There we go. So we've got 2 on this one, so let's look at the top one.
Porch. I agree.
Porch.
I would say these are both porches.
Agree.
Okay.
In this case, both of them are covered by, because you have roof now in our definitions that we're paying attention to, covered by the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
All right. Next up.
It's a stoop.
Why? Why? I don't necessarily disagree.
Masonry poured, cast iron railings, it looks like. Not really functional for anything more other than ingress and egress. No support, pillars or columns holding up the roof. So,
I think that's what makes it questionable, is that there are no support columns. It's not although some of the others didn't have I don't know, the ones that we went at earlier, the roof was sort of integrated into the house, right, as part of the house.
well, they all had columns, at least, maybe, they might be aesthetic.
You're right.
They might
But
be-
the other, you could put a chair on that,
Yeah, that's
the other
not-
one, the stoop. You could, just the same as on the first one. I mean, it looks about the same size. So, but to me, I think a stoop is more minimal than that. It's more like a landing, not a stoop. Does that make sense?
We don't have landing defined. Anybody think it's a porch?
I think it's a porch. I feel like to me, it's the size is really what defines the difference between a porch and a stoop. And a stoop is kind of the minimum you need to open the door comfortably and enter. Whereas this clearly has more than that.
So.
I feel like you can, have a chair or whatever.
Yeah.
I concur with Commissioner Peltier on this. The other element that I'm kind of on the fence about is whether stoops would ever have a covering that has columns. And that's what I'm uncertain about. And I'm on the fence about at the moment. But if the platform is small enough, then it's still a stoop. So maybe really, for me, it is, as you said, just the floor area, the landing area.
Commissioner Hannon, any thoughts on this one?
I think the size, I'm struggling with whether it has columns or not. Does that change the function? And if it's sort of that small size, I kind of getting more comfort in the chair test that was floated out there.
Director App, what would you call it?
Hello, stoop.
Wearing your hat. Okay.
And why would you call it a stoop? Just out of curiosity.
Good question.
I don't necessarily know that roof, they could have that element on there, even if they didn't have, like if things were more at grade, and would I say that that's really a porch roof? I'm not necessarily feeling that it's a porch roof, but the elements, like you say, of, that it's just a simple railing, it's that raised concrete platform, it just seems more stoopy to me than porchy.
You're right, the roof is not dedicated, except for the decorative nature of it. The roof would exist.
And it doesn't even cover the whole width of the landing either, where you kind of typically with a porch kind of expect it to kind of cover that whole platform area. It doesn't seem to be as wide as the platform area either, the gable part of it, so I couldn't confidently call it a porch. I feel pretty confident in calling it a stoop.
If a porch is defined as a covered area, then I would agree that it's not truly a porch.
So,
But where we want to draw, or I feel like where I want to draw the line for stoops, it wouldn't be a stoop either, just because it's in excess of what it needs to be.
It's a storage.
we'll put that in as the new word, storch.
Or, sorry.
Okay, next up, we have this interesting number here.
Stoop.
So that's a stoop.
I would call those steps.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
would
even
just-
stupid.
It's not even.
I wouldn't even say it's not even a stoop. That's
Yeah.
2 steps up to the door, and then happens to have a fancy little awning over the door. So
As a classic awning.
It's pretty.
Okay? You can play along too.
Sonia and I played all afternoon.
so I have this one.
I think that's a porch
Porch.
because of the size.
I think I'm leaning towards porches have coverings that fully cover their entire area.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I made that note after the last photo to say it's, for me, the size of the landing and whether the roof covers the entire landing or not.
Okay.
And somebody else mentioned column. Would you also call it a porch?
Yes.
Okay.
We have this fun number right here.
It's a storage, I think. It's a storage as well.
Well, why are you on the fence? What's missing? Is it columns
The
or?
covering.
Yeah, there's no covering, and there are no columns, but it's far more than a stoop.
Oh, because the covering is at the roof line and not lower?
And it doesn't really, I think, it doesn't appear to really cover
doesn't
all of
appear to
it. It's
cover
more of
the
a roof
entire
extension that
depth
doesn't go
of
out.
the-
all
It's
the-
the eave. I mean, it's the natural eave of the roof there, I think.
But the sheer size of
But
it.
that's a really big stoop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to call it the
So
chair.
you're calling it a large stoop.
I mean, it's got all the elements of the stoop, except that it's really big.
Big.
You know, you don't traditionally think a stoop goes the entire width of it, but I don't think it's a porch because it doesn't really have that roofed structure, separate roof structure over it. So I struggle to call it a porch. I certainly wouldn't approve a stoop this big, and I haven't approved a stoop this big because I think it exceeds the intent of what a stoop is. So,
Right, and to the extent that this would be, let's say, it would be requested as an encroachment, this seems excessive. If you couldn't call it a stoop, and I'm going to extend it over the entire width of my house and ask for, you know, it to be called an allowed encroachment, that wouldn't seem appropriate.
for being that many steps up and the entire width of the house. And
Quick question here, Sonia. If I put a roof over that, then it becomes an acceptable porch?
then we can make it a porch. You
And
could
then
redesign that to make it a little bit more palatable with some sort of, you know, maybe,
Covering.
I'm not exactly sure what kind of roof element you would work into it, but I feel like there's probably something you could do to create a roof element, separate roof element over it, to make it a porch. I think you can kind of see next door, they have a much smaller one. You know, they've kind of made a different sort of element there and made that smaller front porch. On that one, it seems to have this one seems to have the dormer up there, similar to how they have the little shed dormer on this one. Perspective makes it a little hard to see contextually how it is, but, you know, if they could make a porch of similar materials that worked with the scale, I'm not sure what the setback on
So
this
it's-
one is, but for a porch.
So it's not just the size then that dictates whether it's a porch? It's not the platform size.
I don't think we're saying that. I think it's, porches have a fully covered walking area.
Although in no definition does it say fully roofed.
Right, it just says it's a
I'm leaning towards
covered.
that.
Right, we can amend it to make that clear if that's our intent.
Even in your planner's definitions, it doesn't say fully roofed.
So what would prevent this from being approved today? Is it the fact that it is wider than is necessary to provide that
Yes.
base access?
As a student.
Right.
As a student.
So put some columns on it and a covering, and now you've got an acceptable porch.
We might have ourselves a porch.
Yeah.
And then it's an allowed encroachment, but only in the front yard with
Unenclosed.
restrictions.
Yeah, under certain circumstances.
Right.
Right. You know, depending on the setback, I'm not exactly sure how wide that one is, but, you know, they,
Right. Whereas a stoop doesn't have those restrictions on it.
currently, a stoop can only encroach 4 feet into the street yard.
Right.
And then we were trying to figure out how can we make that a little bit more flexible, to provide that a little bit more substantial primary entry stoop. Could be covered if somebody wants it to be, but maybe it's not exactly a porch.
But it's regardless of the depth of your street yard.
Right, it's, you know, doesn't have any.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas with a porch, there's a
Right, we
certain
have an
street yard
absolute
that's-
setback and it starts to kind of
Right.
curtail back in that in-between area, so. If you have a larger setback, you get that full 9 feet.
Mhm.
If you have a smaller setback than 36 feet, then you're restricted to 25% of that depth. And then we have that absolute cutoff of nothing gets closer than 20 feet to the property line.
So to me, that's why we're trying to separate these two things, define them differently.
Mhm.
And a stoop, restrict it more, because it can encroach into the front yard further than a porch can.
Right.
Before we move pictures, the other thing I just wanted to discuss a bit is the next house over, that frame house that you pointed at earlier. So that, with the sidewalls on their porch, if we call that a porch, so the question of whether a stoop would ever have something like that, a solid sidewall, or whether we would have that as part of the definition or not. I'm not sure what
Stoops are
people's
to the-
thoughts are.
Stoops are traditionally an open structure, they're not enclosed.
So a column, but nothing connecting the columns, like this.
So, well, not coming all the way up to the roof. Yeah, I mean, although it looks like that might be a screen.
No, it's like down below that, so
Yeah.
see there's a sidewall.
Like a knee wall.
Yeah, knee wall,
uh-huh.
thank you.
So sometimes you will see stoops, especially ones that shoot to the side. You know, so if you have like the landing, but the stairs come up this way, sometimes they'll have a more decorative sort of like knee wall to kind of, integrate it into the house a little bit more. I think you see those on maybe like some bungalows and maybe some of the more, kind of mid-century houses. You'll see, they have that landing platform, but stairs go towards the driveway, so they go down sideways. And so a lot of times you'll see they'll have like a brick kind of like knee wall going up the side of the stairs. And then it's the, that concrete landing up there, but you don't really see it from the street because it's got that kind of decorative wall along the stairs, as opposed to it just being, like your railing and the exposed concrete.
Under the building code, Sonia, do you know at what point with a raised landing stoop, you have to have a railing enclosing it for safety?
There is a point, I want to say, it's when you get over maybe like
30 inches.
30 inches?
30 inches is pretty high.
Something. Yeah.
Certain height at which.
That's what I'm guessing, but 30 inches is quite high. I mean, if someone walked off of that, that would, interesting.
I don't know if it's 30, I'm guessing. If we hadn't already.
I know it's more than 24 inches,
Okay.
but I don't think it's as high as 36 inches. So it might be as low as 28, but I feel like it might be in the 30 range, so. Not my building code with me, so. All right, should we move on to the next one?
Please.
Okay.
Kind of obscured, but
I think it's a stoop.
I would concur with that.
Stoop.
stoop with steps and an awning.
I think so.
Okay.
fully roofed and it has columns.
Yeah,
I'd call that a stoop.
it does look like a stoop. It
It
looks
does.
like it, despite the fact that they added some decoration around it, you know, with the extra roof. It still looks like a stoop.
But before, we were using fully roofed and columns as a reason to call something a porch.
But it would be hard to put
I
a
think
chair on
size,
that,
yeah.
because on the one side, the door is opening in, on the other side, it's very narrow.
I think it's a little bit bigger than the size we would want to restrict a stoop to, but it's basically a stoop.
I don't know that we had agreement that columns meant it was a porch.
I agree with that.
No, it's just been mentioned.
Got it, right, okay.
And if
I
you
was
talk
saying
about
porch.
columns, if you talk about columns, I think you have to say, well, are they decorative, are they supportive? I mean, these are probably decorative, a lot of them are often decorative. So I don't think columns or pillars should be determinative for that very reason.
Right.
And then if you have those recessed porches that are like under the house, they don't need columns at all, so.
So Director App, you call it a porch because,
I thought it was a fairly substantial roof element that they had coming out of there. It's a little bit on the wide side, and then it had the columns coming down, so I was leaning porch on this one.
So if you took the columns and the railings off, what is it?
It's a stoop.
Yeah, I think that the intent is just to get in and out. It's not to hang around. And therefore, to me, it was a stoop for that reason.
Well, it's a good consideration. I mean, the use of it, right, would linger.
Right.
That's the thing about a porch. You can hang out on your porch. You're not gonna hang out on the stoop, most likely.
Right.
I think we're getting back to, I'm gonna call it Commissioner Hannon's chair rule.
Yeah.
If you can put a chair on it, then it starts to get to that porch size.
you could put a chair there.
But it would be really hard.
It would be in the way of the door, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the way that
throw
door
things into it.
swings.
Yeah.
Although it may be equal on both sides, it's a little hard to tell from
It
this
looks
angle.
equitable.
Right, so remember the existing proposed definition of stoop includes utilized primarily as an access platform to a building, which implies, there's not space for chairs and such.
All right, so most of the commission is feeling stoop on this one? A covered stoop.
Most soup.
Would we call that a canopy? Is that a canopy that's over the stoop, maybe?
It looks like more of a roof extension to me than a canopy, because it is very substantial.
It's more than an awning because it has the columns.
But the columns, are those structural, do you think?
I don't know that we necessarily can go that way since you can do a lot of interesting things with materials.
Well, it looks like it's, the roof is going across the length of the house, sticking out a bit, and then they simply added a little extra pinnacle there. And whether those supports are needed to support that little extension, it's hard to say.
It's hard to tell.
Question mark on that one.
All right, next up, we have this one.
I guess it's too wide to be a stoop.
I would call that a step.
It looks like a stoop. I mean, it looks like a platform.
Right.
You could put a chair or two there, but would you linger there? I don't know. I mean, you could sit there, but it doesn't seem porch-like. It just isn't, it's funny. I mean, maybe it's because there are no steps, so it doesn't feel substantial enough.
Right.
But that's not the right way to make that choice, whether there are steps or not, whether it's physically imposing or not.
So the covering over it though, then, Is that just a canopy that's over the entry?
I think it's the size. I think it's too big to be a stoop. I think
It's only one step up, it's not much of a stoop. I mean,
Is the number of steps relevant to the,
a stoop is kind of implied that it's a raised platform, so one step doesn't seem very stoopy to me.
so then is it,
But-
then you're saying it's a porch or no, not even a porch?
Well,
Based on the
I'm
last
going
one-
with
this
I have
part
two
is making me
choices.
lean towards porch,
Yeah.
but the fact that it's just one step
Yeah,
is,
One of the planning definitions of a stoop is at least 6 inch higher than ground level. So that
it's
makes
definitely six.
that's one step.
platform.
6 inches is
Yeah.
one step. So that's not very high, but
But at 6 inches, isn't it a raised platform?
the raised platform.
But based on the last picture, you would call that a porch. It's fully covered.
Fully covered.
It's wide.
It seems like under Riverside's definitions and the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, this would be a porch,
That's where I was leaning.
even though
It's
it's,
just a little weird because it's only one step up.
But what would we want to call it?
Well, I feel it's too wide to be a stoop,
I
to be
agree.
considered a stoop.
So if this had no covering over it at all and was just that slab of concrete in front of the door, would you call that a stoop?
I would call it a stoop
Oh,
because
step.
it's so low to the ground. And I think we're somewhat, my definition of stoop and step are merging quickly.
Well, what if it was 3 feet high with no cover, then? But it's too big to be a stoop. Do we have, is there another, is that a patio? No, patios are great.
Deck?
I'm just, a deck?
No. No, not a deck.
But I guess if they were coming to us with this proposal, or
Right.
coming to Director App with this proposal, and they were proposing a stoop with none of this covering, they'd have to go by our size definitions, whatever we come up with, right? So it might be that they couldn't build this today, if in fact it was, they came forward with the stoop and they asked for it to be this wide and that exceeded our limitations, then instead it would have to be a porch.
Yes.
It's
Depending
pigeonholed
on-
as a porch.
Would we call this a porch? I mean, would
I
they be
have-
able to build this
I would,
as a porch?
I would say this would be a porch.
I would-
If somebody was proposing to build something like
This.
this over their front door, I would say this would be a
So if you narrowed those posts, you kept the roof and you narrowed those posts, brought them in each a foot closer to the door, is it a porch or a stoop? You've kept the columns, you've kept the roof.
if it was narrower, you're saying?
Yeah,
Then I think it's more like a stoop.
Yeah. I think if it's a couple feet, I mean, yeah, to go into the, whatever definition we might come up with.
I mean, I think
But,
clearly
yeah, then it would be a
size and the width and the depth matter, and if it's roofed. And it makes it, obviously, some things are easier to define than others. If it has a substantial roof like this, as opposed to a little roof extension, it makes it easier to call it a porch. But I think, yes, I think this is a porch. And if it was narrower, and it still had a covering over it, if it was narrower, it could only serve as an access point to the building. So even if it had a covering over it, it would have to be a stoop.
Right.
is the intent of this anything more than ingress and egress though?
Well, you could put chairs or pots or something next to it. The fact that this homeowner hasn't doesn't mean you couldn't sit out there. I mean, they did invest in that roof, right? Someone did.
Mm-hmm. So we're still a little divided on this one? Or are we mostly leaning towards porch on this one?
I would call that a stoop.
I think it's a porch.
Stoop.
An entry porch. I was looking at one of those books, what is the, I forget the name of it, the thick book on houses, and I think they would call this an entry porch.
Fair enough.
Typical porch. The
No
field guide
adjectives
to
allowed.
houses or whatever that's called.
Oh, mhm.
No adjectives allowed.
All right, so we're mostly leaning towards porch on this one. Okay.
Stoop. Stoop.
We're all on stoop?
Yep.
Yep. All right, next up.
It's a stoop.
Stoop.
Stoop and
Stoop.
awning.
Stoop that's got an awning over it.
But it's primarily an entryway, there's nowhere to sit or do anything else.
This one's a little tricky. This has, like a little Juliet balcony. That's a French door up there above the front door. And so they've made this little railinged off Juliet balcony that goes over this area.
Are there, there's no columns?
No columns.
Interesting. Looks like it falls.
It's magic thing.
I was
People
thinking-
couldn't stand on that, yeah, it's not for use maybe.
What was that?
No, I was thinking that too.
Right.
Look at this, I'm like,
I don't wanna
no
stand
way
up
I'm
there.
going out on that.
I've seen other porches.
Especially after heavy snow, it's going to,
So I think this is a stoop, I would call this a stoop.
I know this house.
Because it's too bare bones, the platform part is just too narrow.
But it is fully roofed.
You'll notice where they put their chairs.
Yeah.
Not on the stoop.
yeah.
Well, I think one thing we talked about today, you said it's fully roofed, but is it really intended as the roof, or is it just, there's a balcony above it?
So they built the platform after that balcony thing was on there probably.
Well, they probably always had the platform to get to the front door.
Right, they might have made
It is
But-
protecting from the elements.
You know, they chose this architectural element of this balcony, Juliet balcony, for that, whatever, I'm assuming it's a bedroom, master bedroom maybe up there. So it does provide that covered entryway as well. It's kind of a dual purpose thing. But it's not really a roof because it's a balcony for the,
But I guess I don't feel like the fact that it's covered or not covered makes it a stoop or a porch. I don't feel like that's the definition between a stoop and a porch. I don't see any reason why a stoop can't be covered. Because you want protection from the elements when you're entering
Right.
your home. So, I mean, this looks like a stoop, but by our definition, it's too big to be, so it wouldn't be able to be constructed presumably under our stoop definition.
That's exactly my feeling on this. It seems stupid, it seems slightly too big from where I think we're probably gonna end up with.
Is it too big, or are you considering the stairs?
No, not
Don't consider the stairs.
It's the
Just
other
seems
side,
considering
actually.
the width.
The other end of it. Now, I don't know, we're not here to decide, we're not gonna go to these people's house and tell them they have a stoop or a
No,
porch.
but I'm just
It's just
saying.
kind of like what our general feelings are. It, to me, feels a little big to be a stoop, but in general, I think this concept would be a stoop.
Dr. App, is that what you would call it?
I thought it was a stoop. A little on the big side for a stoop, but a stoop nonetheless.
So, I don't know if this is the right place to interject this, but it just occurs to me that maybe then the Riverside's existing definition of stoop should have some kind of a width dimension to it. Now it says primarily as an access platform with the finished floor elevation higher than the adjacent ground level, and utilized primarily as an access platform to a building. So maybe we should insert into that some kind of a width or depth
Well,
dimension.
Didn't we, we limited it to an area?
We
And
Well,
limited
but
it
that was for stoops though, not
previously
for
to-
primary entryway. I'm also thinking adding to the stoop definition. And in the encroachments table, it says it can't encroach more than 4 feet, but that doesn't say anything about the size of the stoop overall.
Right, because if it's just the size overall, that gets back to this prior picture, where potentially what's here could meet
The
the area
27
for a
feet.
stoop, but to me, it feels too wide for a stoop. So to what Commissioner Miller is saying, potentially we would have some kind of limit, potentially on the width as well as the overall area.
For stoops as well as primary entryways or whatever it
Right.
is we're considering.
But isn't utilized primarily as an access platform, self-limiting as to width?
You could say that, but then you can still get into questions of like, what is this? This is primarily utilized,
Right.
but
Right.
some
but the
people
sta-
think it's a little bit too wide. And I think maybe that's partly because the stairs come off to the sides.
Right, I think the stairs coming off from the side affects that.
Yeah, because if you did it straight up, well, although sometimes with some of these others, it comes straight up, but then there's a little bit of an extension on either side of the door for the platform. I don't know.
I think the 27-foot maximum area also self-regulates. I mean, you can only go so wide if you're gonna give a platform that's big enough for the
Right.
door to swing.
But that's for the primary entryway that we're discussing, not the stoop. So
But
maybe
Sorry,
go ahead. No.
I think 27 square feet is too big. I think if we start looking at the chair rule, I think more like 20 square feet is enough.
What was that ADA? It was 5
Well-
foot by,
5 by 4.
by 5 by 4.
Problem is ADA doesn't really count when you're going upstairs.
No, it doesn't count, but I think it's a reasonable basis for,
Okay.
you know what I mean? It's not
That's fair.
arbitrary.
So what does that,
So to me, it's a sensible thing
you
to,
said 5 by 4?
So
5 by 4.
Which is 20.
it's a minimum,
which
it's
is-
4, I think a minimum it's 4 feet out and then 5 feet wide. Because it's the door width, which is 3 feet plus an additional 24 inches, that's an additional 2 feet. So you're looking at a minimum coming out 4 feet, although I think preferred was 5 feet. And then for the width,
And that's setting minimums, right?
yes,
We're talking about maximum.
right, I understand.
But our maximum might be close to this minimum.
Yeah.
I mean, but the purpose for that size, because we're really mixing apples and oranges here,
Is for wheelchair access.
is for access for disabled persons. It has nothing to do with aesthetics. It has nothing to do with encroachments, nothing. So I don't think that that's a good point of reference at all.
I think it's just to get, like I said, it's to give you a feel of how do you accommodate somebody trying to get into a door that is swinging out over your landing. And obviously that is something that has to be very clearly thought about when you're dealing with an accessibility issue. But it's something that we've tried to been mulling over as we're trying to figure out what is a reasonable, usable area that we want to allow to encroach into our required street yard. So I thought that was a good basis for comparison, is that it's not a huge amount, but that is kind of the clear area that they want in front of a door for ADA purposes. Obviously, you wouldn't have stairs right after that. But it just kind of gives you that idea of trying to accommodate a person and that door movement and being in that area. And at a minimum, you're looking at 20 square feet to do that. That's less than what we were talking about. So does that mean we want it to do smaller? Are we still comfortable with 27 square feet? Do we think 27 square feet isn't gonna work? From an aesthetic standpoint, you look at this one, and what I'm seeing is equidistant on either side of the door, for the most part, and then you have the stairs coming down. So they've centered it, it's kind of lining up, you know, this column here, column over there, it's kind of equidistant, and then in this case, they happen to have the stairs coming down to the side versus the stairs coming down to the front. But this seems centered and right, and it falls between the windows that are on either side, and there's a proportionality that feels correct to it. But on the other hand, we're saying we feel that this feels like it's a little bit too wide and a little bit too big. So there's to me, architecturally pleasing why, there's a rightness to this.
But only
It's
because
not
of the
coming
house
out
that-
very, it's not coming out very far, but for this house, there's a rightness to this. Like it feels appropriate. It doesn't feel like it's really too big for that entry. It doesn't feel excessive or out of place. To me, it doesn't. But in some case, but there is that little bit of it feeling a little bit large, I think, just because you do have all these stairs coming down to the side. But, you have to have stairs coming down to the side, and that's, this is where they brought their sidewalk in, or their walkway in from the sidewalk to come this way and go up those stairs.
What if that were wood? Would that change anyone's opinion as to what it is, or whether it's too big?
What if what?
Or if the whole
If the-
construction was wood?
If it was wood instead of,
So if it was a wood platform and stairs coming down?
I don't know that it would change my perception.
I don't think so, but you're right, we don't have a lot of wood porches and stoops. Stoops are usually a concrete poured, right?
Typically, yeah. Sometimes you have.
But again, for me, I'm not sure if I'm getting confused here, but this to me is not, this could be fine as a primary entryway, and I would guess it's not any bigger than 27 square feet. But whether it's a stoop or not is another question. And I don't think we're proposing to allow primary entryways of up to, let's say, 27 square feet to encroach into a front yard. So I think if we get a lot bigger than that, then they shouldn't be allowed as encroachments, that's all. Doesn't mean people can't build them bigger, it's just they can't be an allowed encroachment.
I'm just wondering how many entryways we're gonna make non-conforming. But let's continue.
Looks like a porch.
It seems bigger than a stoop. Like deeper maybe? So it seems more like a porch to me.
Looks like a porch.
I was thinking porch. That's a fairly substantial roof structure that's covering that area. It's big, it's very deep.
Okay?
But it's substantial because of the size of the landing, right? Because if you compare it to the next one, the next photo,
It's a pretty substantial roof.
it's similar feel, it's just a lot smaller because the landing is smaller, you know?
Yeah.
I
So
still
for
call
me,
it a porch.
Yeah, you call that a porch?
I call it a porch.
Okay.
It's an independent roof structure coming out over it.
You just have a different definition of a porch than
Yeah, that's
I do,
a stoop.
at least.
Yeah.
Just because you're using covered as part of the definition of the porch.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
me,
it
it
looks
keeps
like a
going
covered
back to
stoop.
size of
It's a covered
landing.
stoop.
I mean, that's, you can't put a chair there, you can
Yeah.
barely get in your door there.
Yeah.
It's
That
very
that one
small.
looks ADA compliant.
It looks nice, though. I mean, it's a
does.
nice stoop.
Yeah.
So most of you guys are feeling stoopy on this one?
Yes.
A covered
Yeah.
stoop?
Yeah.
Yes.
We saw this one
And again,
earlier.
because of size or because of what it's made out of?
Because of the
Size.
size of the
Size.
platform
Yeah.
of the entryway.
We saw this one before, this is a repeat, so, let's see, got this one.
Stoop? It's not even a stoop, it looks like it's just steps, right?
Yeah.
Steps
Steps.
up to the,
You don't think that needs code, does it?
it
No,
doesn't anymore.
no, it does not.
Actually, just as a side comment, most of these wouldn't meet code.
Or they don't meet code, right?
They don't,
They're
because
currently
I
non-compliant.
think if you look at, there's a the building code requires there be a landing or floor on each side of each exterior door. The landing or floor must be no more than 1.5 inches lower than the top of the threshold. Most of what we're seeing is easily 4 or 5 inches lower than the threshold. They all have a step down onto the platform.
All right. This one's a little hard to see, but
That one looks like a stoop. Even though it has a lot of steps up to it, it still looks, from the picture, like a stoop.
We're back to Commissioner Miller's landing, I think.
Or landing, right. I mean, it doesn't really look like a stoop because it's integrated into the house, but it's not a porch either. It's just not large enough to be a porch.
But we don't have a definition of a landing, do we?
I don't think we need one.
I was thinking stoop, wasn't feeling porch on this one.
But you, in the new proposed definition, or in the new encroachment table, you do mention stoops, landings, and other similar structures serving a primary entry.
Right,
So
that's
we
kind of
are
how we tried to
introducing-
group these things together.
Introducing that term, yes.
Yes.
Ooh, next one could be tricky.
It's a porch. They have a chair there on the left. So you could linger.
They sealed their fate, they
You
put a
could
chair
linger.
out.
And it's well protected from the elements, so you could linger in the rain, too.
We agree, porch? Yeah. Okay.
All right, next up.
I know what I'm looking at
It's
here.
hard to see it.
Yeah, it's hard to see it.
Oh.
It does have, it has stairs that kind of come out and then down to the side, so.
That's a stoop.
Stoop.
Yeah, it does look like a stoop. It might be a little too big.
And then just to mix things up a bit, it's on the side.
Is the door right at the top of the stairs?
So the door is actually on the side, but this is like the opening, so you'd stand there and you can open up the door going out that way.
You can see it better in the print picture. Yeah, it does look, though, like it doesn't look like there's a landing, just like in the 173 Gage
Yeah.
house, maybe, where there was no landing.
Steps to a landing?
Mm-hmm. So I would almost say we've got a little side porch here with the stairs leading up to it.
It's an
the side of the
enclosed
house.
side porch. Yeah. With steps.
So, but it doesn't, it doesn't even really look like it has that required landing there
Yeah.
at that door. It doesn't, it's very small.
So what would you call that?
I would just say that that's stairs leading up to what is basically a side porch. So it looks like the door.
And it's a porch.
The
and not
door
just-
is recessed just a little bit. And it looks like it opens up.
Well, how is it different than the 1-3 earlier where the door was a little recessed?
This
Oh,
is
the
a
front loading
custom-made
garage?
roof.
This one?
It looks like it's part of
No, it's front loading garage.
Oh, the one we just looked at.
I would
So, but
say-
again, this one is on the side of the house, so it's not in the street yard. I just thought that was a,
Well, how is it different from just being part of the house?
It's got that separate roof on it. that roof is entirely there for the purpose of protecting
I think
the,
that area.
the landing area.
Well, yeah,
But
but
to Attorney
you
Mars'
could have
point-
different levels of roof lines in your house, right? Is it
And
just,
it's completely enclosed, it's not,
right,
I guess it could be enclosed.
Yeah, it looks like an enclosed porch to
It
me,
is
with
enclosed.
stairs leading up to it.
Mhm.
It's just a bit odd because
It's just a-
of its location.
Maybe because it's not fully roofed.
Which one are we looking at? The split level?
Front loading garage? Yes.
Oh, too far.
So Attorney Mars is asking why that one's different than the one we're just looking at with the side porch?
Well, I think, isn't there a
Called
bit
this a
more of a
stoop?
platform there in front of that door? It looks to me like it's a bit more recessed.
yeah, it looks like there's a landing on the mid-century one.
I think there's a platform at the top of the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
On
And
this
then you
most-
step up to the door.
Yeah.
If you look
looks
again,
like
if you
there's-
look at the printed photos, it's easier.
But then going back to this, too, I remember saying stoop, because it's, never mind. And so I guess one of the things I'm trying to get clarification on is when, you know, there was one earlier where you said, well, we were debating porch versus stoop. And everyone said, well, it's so narrow, it's gotta be a stoop. And so this one's so narrow.
But it's also fully enclosed,
Right.
so that to
So
me
it's
is the
that-
distinction.
Closed on three sides,
Right.
that's.
Yeah, I think it's closed on 4 sides, isn't it?
No.
Well, the fourth side is the door, well, no, it's covered
But
with
with the
door.
door, yeah, it's.
No, there's the
enclosed
door
on four
there.
sides, yes.
It's completely
It's
enclosed.
fully enclosed.
This is open. It's like a cave.
No, there's a door there.
No, but you're seeing,
Isn't it a
you're
brown
seeing
door?
a little window behind.
Oh,
It's
really?
like-
I can't tell.
It's
from the
like a
photo.
cave.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You think it's just like you walk
I
into
think
it?
I've been to that house.
Oh.
That's why I say that. I think
So that's
it's just
not a door
I think
there.
it's a
Unfair.
side opening door and it's like walking up to a cave.
Oh, I thought there was a door
what?
there.
No, you're not looking at the door.
Oh, I
No,
thought it
you're
was a
not
door.
I thought that was
looking
a
at
door.
No,
Oh, I thought that was a door.
No,
It's a side door.
the door faces the other.
You have better vision than I do.
But it's still
It still looks to me like an enclosed porch.
it's an
Right.
enclosed porch with an open entry, just like, I don't know.
It's in a gray
Other,
area.
yeah, other enclosed porches that have doors, and this one doesn't have a door. But when we get to these definitions, I mean, one of the things porch says it's a covered structure, a roofed structure, a single-story roofed structure which can be unenclosed or enclosed. And so I don't know if we get to a point where, well, if you have a narrow, you can either have a stoop, or you can have something substantial, but you can't have something that's between the two dimensionally, because we can't call it a stoop and we can't call it a porch. So I don't know, I mean, are there things that people propose that you say, I can't define this, I can't categorize it, so you have to
Get a variance.
change it to make it more identifiable? I mean, we have so many old things here that it's hard to use those as.
These lovely people were without stairs to their house for a while.
I was wondering what was going on.
Because they had a concrete stoop and stairs originally. They wanted to do something a little bit different. They had the house re-sided and they did not want to put a concrete stoop up against it for fear that they would have the same issues behind it that they had had before. What they wanted to do was a porch. I said was more than a stoop, wasn't technically a porch because it wasn't roof, but we hadn't defined things out yet at that point with porch. But they wanted to do something that was this full width here. And so they didn't want to go through the variance process. They were trying to figure out what to do. And ultimately, what we went with was, coming out just slightly wider than the door, so they would be able to open a store maybe on there, and coming out the 4 feet that's allowed by code for a stoop. So this is the stoop we ended up with before the porch regulations were finalized. But even with their porch regulations, this would have been the only area that was roofed. They weren't doing anything this whole width, but they wanted to have something that whole width. So it wouldn't really have fallen within our porch definition. So it probably would have required a variance anyways for them to do anything really wider than what they have there. Would we want to allow them to do something that was this full width? So, but the intention was, they wanted it to be able to maybe have a chair out there.
So I guess it gets back to the idea of allowing a primary entryway. We can't necessarily call it a stoop or a porch, but it's a primary entryway, and you can design it the way you like within certain restrictions if it's going to encroach in the street yard. So maybe they could have been allowed, and we couldn't really define it as a porch or a stoop, but it's their entryway, and it would be
And they could have
allowable.
up to 27 square feet, however they want to divvy it up.
With the roof or columns or knee walls or whatever they like, is what you're saying.
Right, yes, and it doesn't have to fall under the definition of porch. It could, but maybe it doesn't. Like if it does have knee walls and it's not totally covered, it wouldn't meet our current definition of porch because it's not covered. A porch is a roofed structure under our current definitions.
But under our current definition, which I don't know that we've
Right.
decided to keep that definition, just throwing that out there.
Right, no, that could be changed, but I think that the board and maybe this commission a couple years ago went through a long process of changing that definition. So I don't know if there's a desire to change that definition.
Well, if we feel it needs to be fine-tuned, now's the opportunity to do it. So, then we have.
I mean, the problem is there's so many elements. There's so many elements that we're looking at here that vary. There's no consistency to the elements. You have something that looks like a stoop, but it's got columns, now it becomes a porch. If you take the columns out, it's back to a stoop. I mean, the elements vary. You're not going to capture all the possible combinations.
Which is why for me, it just keeps coming back to the size of the landing. That just might be too simplistic.
Okay, so what's that?
It's just an entryway.
Right.
There's a platform, a one-step platform. So I guess it's a stoop. And then you step up to the door. But it doesn't, given how wide the door is, it doesn't look like you could put a chair or anything out.
So you're saying stoop?
I think stoop, yeah.
I went with porch. That's a very substantial roof structure over that area, so.
It is substantial, yeah. Very substantial.
So are they required to have the step?
I mean, yeah, it looks like the door is
I
a
mean,
couple steps above grade. I mean, they,
if it was lower to grade and didn't have that platform, but had that substantial roof, it wouldn't be a porch, right?
You mean if the sidewalk just went right up
Yeah.
to it and you
Yeah.
walked into the door?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would just be an entryway.
It
It
would
would
be
be
either, yeah.
Or roof, subroof.
But depending on how deep that is, we might not allow that roof to encroach that much into the street yard.
It looks like it has these.
For an entryway, if there weren't the steps, you mean.
So I think we only allow like roof eaves, so to speak, to encroach 24 inches into the required street yard. And that seems like it's more than 24 inches to me,
Oh, yeah.
so.
How about canopies or awnings?
I think they're 36 inches. Let me double check.
Did we have this meeting?
36 in R1, R2, and R3.
I think we should.
We can't stay on.
Yep, 36 inches into the street yard for awnings and canopies.
That's a canopy, isn't it? Or do you call it a roof?
I thought it looked like a roof. Just in how it mimics the other areas of the roofing elements. And it does appear that it's all tied back to the house.
So Sonia, where did you get these definitions from?
There's a APA publication, American Planning Association publication called the Planner's Dictionary. And so they compiled definitions from communities all over the nation to kind of give you an idea of the different ways that different communities define these types of.
So it's not definition, I mean, it's not definitive. They're just providing.
Right.
Some of them are
Providing you
interesting. I mean,
with
were these
information.
considered at the time when the commission, the board were talking about porches?
I did use them in helping craft a definition. I looked at them, but I don't necessarily know that I shared all those definitions with the commission.
Well, it's
so.
interesting that like a porch includes from Newport Beach, California, a covered platform, usually having a separate roof. And then there's something called a raised porch, so there's some, obviously other people have struggled with these same issues of trying to define everything.
So what about one last picture?
Oh, there's one more.
Yes. Next one's this one.
It has a chair.
But again, under our definition, it's supposed to be a roofed
Right.
area, so it's not
It's
totally
not,
roofed.
it's not roofed, it has no columns. It's poured concrete.
Right, so it's not
Right.
really a structure, you're right, it's an extension of the house,
Right.
that, it's a
And-
stoop,
and-
not part of the house, not integral to the house.
I want to call it a stoop, and yet it's pretty big.
It is more than 27 square feet.
It's pretty big.
I called it a stoop.
I think size-wise, it's too
See?
big to be a stoop.
Right. So I think I feel like we're doing two different things. We have to start over. Because.
Tonight,
That's
No.
right, maybe.
I agree with Commissioner Scanlon that according to the definition that I'm using, which is using size, it can't be a stoop because it's too big to be a stoop. But from one's perception, it looks like a stoop. So it's a stoop, but it's too big. I guess what I'm saying is I'm changing now what I'm calling a stoop and a porch, not using the definition that was established previously. It's a stoop, but it's too big.
But it could be a primary entryway, whatever it's called otherwise.
If we just, yeah.
If we have a separate
Definition
definition.
for primary entryway.
Right.
And so is that the direction that we want to go, is have a stoop that's very minimal, a primary entryway that maybe can be a little bit bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and a porch.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that is what's proposed, it's just that, again, I'm worried that the 27 square feet is going to make a lot of nonconformities.
But having that middle ground gets you out of the compliance issue, right?
What's the middle ground?
Kind of this primary entryway.
And it may create nonconformities, but we have
Those
coverage in
exist.
our ordinance for, right, nonconformities. They can,
And those nonconformities exist right now anyway, right? So I don't know if we're creating more nonconformities. I don't think so.
right,
We're
Or we
only
create a
adding
new category.
We're adding one new category,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that
we're trying to decrease
anything's, yeah, exactly. We're trying to decrease the nonconformities, not, and give people more flexibility. I think one of the, just on a little side note, one of the comments of one of the trustees at some point was about this idea of dimensions and using 3-foot dimensions or something like that, and suggesting that maybe there should be some kind of an engineer, a building engineer consulted. So I don't know anything about that. I have no idea if that's,
I don't know that any of our definitions have gone to more than size and the chair rule, and more substantial becomes a porch. And I'm not going for drama here, but it's gonna end up seeming that way, but here's the chair rule. 20 square, those two pieces of paper together are about 20 square feet. So, actually, they're probably more like 21 square feet.
so is 3 feet the typical width of a door?
28 to 30 inches.
Like a door like that for an entry door?
30 inches, Sonia, for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Narrow doors are 28. You would probably feel more comfortable with a 30-inch door.
Mm-hmm.
32.
And if you had a door in the middle of that platform, you couldn't have that chair there.
Correct. Which would then make it a stoop.
But what you have down there, those two pieces of paper are 18 square feet, right?
Those two pieces of paper are about, together, they're about 21 square feet.
21.
So there's the additional 6 inches. which
Because
is
there's
the dash
additional
line.
6 inches on the backside towards the chairs.
So if you added this piece
So
of
you-
paper here, you have 30.
That makes it 30 square feet.
So what is our next step?
Go home,
We,
go to bed.
yeah, right, we keep talking about this, or it now turns over to you because we've gone through these examples and given you our
Right.
all over
Would
the board
you-
thoughts?
You know, do you want, based on some of this feedback, for Attorney Mars and I to go back and try to tweak some of the definitions? Are we having second thoughts about the 27 square foot size for this primary entry that we're trying to create this new category of?
I'm concerned with what Chairperson said, that we don't want to create more nonconformities if we can avoid it. So whatever we do, probably we should take that into consideration. How do we avoid that to the extent possible?
So, I mean, we have the similar language like we previously had in the porches, and is still kind of there, that, you know, existing porches that are non-conforming can continue to be maintained and be rebuilt, but they can't be expanded and you can't change their form. So if somebody, we could maybe do similar language for primary entries that are existing and don't meet these standards, you know, they would be allowed to be maintained, be rebuilt, should something happen.
Isn't that already in our ordinance to any non-conforming use? It doesn't need to be added?
It's a little bit stricter than that. So
Okay.
if it gets destroyed, you wouldn't be able to rebuild it,
Okay,
but you can maintain it,
right,
so,
okay.
for non-conforming structures, yeah.
I think I'm more where Commissioner Mendoza's at, though. These, while our stoop definition, essentially a chairless, narrow entry, the definition is fine. Most of these, where they're a little bit bigger, they're 35 square feet. They've got enough room for a chair or two and an entry and some stairs. They're not quite porches, but why would we make these non-conforming?
Are we making them non-conforming?
If we go down to 27 square feet, I think a bunch of them would be.
That's
Well,
seven.
they're
But they're not
approaching
allowed
more
now.
than,
They're not allowed now. This is not allowable now, is it?
if it's encroaching more than 4 feet into the street yard, then it's already non-conforming.
So it is possible that we may be decreasing the nonconformities by,
That was the hope.
Yeah.
That was the idea behind this, is that we would be decreasing
Right.
nonconformities because we'd be providing that flexibility to have more than just that small 3x3, 4x4 pad, you know.
And
like-
allowing people who don't have an existing entryway like 173 gauge to build something, even though they have a narrower street yard, but to build something that could be a little bit more substantial than what they have now, which is just some stairs on the side of their house,
Right.
without coming to the zoning commission.
Do we want this to apply just to new construction?
no,
Just throwing it out there.
right?
Sure. That's one way to definitely limit the creation of nonconformities.
I haven't thought that out to see how much of a administrative or otherwise nightmare that would be.
But does that mean that someone who has an existing house can do what they want? I'm not sure what you mean by new construction.
Like the
you're putting a
173
whole
gauge
new-
wouldn't have been helped,
Right,
because that's not a new, that wouldn't be new.
Well, no, anybody would need a permit for anything. And maybe the two of you can think about that and what value, if any, there is to that.
Okay.
Again, I haven't thought about it. It's 11 o'clock at night.
All right, so maybe Attorney Mars and I will try
We'll play around with the
to play around with some definitions and come back to you, but we'll keep the 27 square feet in there for now.
Do you want any comments on the changes that were made to this? The redlining and the strikeouts
Sure.
that are proposed in here? Okay. I had some questions, but I don't want to bring them up. That's for sure.
I think we're definitely not ready for a public hearing.
No, I don't think
Right.
we're ready for public hearing yet. Let's see, as for, I do have an informational item, and I will email it to to you, but it is the 2019 calendar for our meetings. Let me see here. Specifically, usually it's November and December that are the problem children for our meetings. So I think in, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So for November of 2019, I believe our meeting falls the Wednesday before, or the Wednesday after Thanksgiving. So that shouldn't be an issue. I think similar this year. Our fourth Wednesday is after the third. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so we unless somebody thinks there would be an issue with doing the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, I don't think that one needs to be changed from its normal date. But next year, our meeting would fall on Christmas Day. I'm assuming we don't really want to be here. So I know we usually have a conflict for third Wednesdays with Commissioner Marhol and with RTV. So if we want to maybe look at the third, I think we're proposing the third Monday of December in 2019. So I'll send you the calendar and let me know if that works for you. I think we had proposed either the third Wednesday or the third Monday in our draft calendar. Like I said, as I recall, for RTV and for Commissioner Marhul, the third Wednesdays of the month are typically an issue with the school district meetings because RTV films those. So I'll forward that to you. Let me know what your preferences are for that alternate date, and I will get that to the village clerk for us to finalize up our meeting calendar for 2019. Meeting is still typical fourth Wednesday of the month for November. December, I believe, is the third Monday for December, should we need to have a December meeting.
So November 28th, do you know if we already have business?
I have not received anything yet. I don't think I've had my deadline yet. So we would have this if we wanted to in November versus December. So
We'll be out of the country.
for November? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because of this?
Yeah. If only I could.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thanks, everyone. Long evening. Appreciate it.